إن شاء الله بعد دقيقتين تبدأ الفعالية.
صباح الخير دكتور عبد الرحمن. صباح الخير.
صباح النور. اهلا وسهلا دكتور.
ايوه جميعا.
الله يحييك. مرحبا بك. صباح الخير الجميع.
السلام عليكم.
السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. مساك الله بالخير.
مرحبا. صباح الخير. الله يحفظكم ان شاء الله.
الله يحييك يا مرحبا بك.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
أعتقد المتحدثين في الجلسة الافتتاحية متواجدين، معالي حسين إبراهيم الحمادي والدكتور عبد الرحمن والدكتور علي القرني والدكتور حمد الهمامي متواجد.
نعم متواجد.
يا هلا دكتور، يا هلا. إذن إحنا سوف نبدأ بإذن الله بالتوكل عليه بالفعاليات هذا الحوار. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أسعد الله صباحكم. معكم مهرة المطيوعي، مدير عام المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي. معالي حسين بن إبراهيم الحمادي، وزير التربية والتعليم في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة. معالي الدكتور عبد الرحمن بن محمد العاصمي، نائب وزير التعليم بالمملكة العربية السعودية. معالي الدكتور علي القرني، مدير مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج. سعادة الدكتور حمد الهمامي، مدير عام مكتب اليونسكو للتربية في الدول العربية ببيروت. سعادة الدكتور عبد الرحمن المدريس، مدير عام المركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم. السيد أندرياس شلايشر، مدير إدارة التربية والمهارات بمنظمة التنمية والتعاون الدولي. السادة شركائنا والخبراء والمتحدثين الكرام اليوم، الأخوة والأخوات الحضور، إن أحد أهم أهدافنا في المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي، والتي نأمل في تحقيقها من خلال الشراكات الاستراتيجية، هي إقامة منصات مشتركة لبناء القدرات البشرية وصنع السياسات المتوائمة مع أحدث التوجهات في مجال التعليم والملبية لاحتياجات الدول، والعمل السموحة من الأخوة، أعتقد كان في قطع. إن أحد أهم أهدافنا في المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي والتي نأمل في تحقيقها من خلال الشراكات الاستراتيجية هي إقامة منصات مشتركة لبناء القدرات البشرية وصنع السياسات المتوائمة مع أحدث التوجهات في مجال التعليم والملبية لاحتياجات الدول، والعمل على نشر المعرفة والثقافة التربوية. ويمثل مشروع حوار السياسات التعليمية منصة من هذه المنصات التي يستثمرها المركز في تحقيق أهدافه، وهي أداة ومنصة تفاعلية لنشر المعرفة المتعلقة بالتعليم وسياساته وإداراته بين المؤسسات والوزارات المختصة بالشأن التعليمي على المستوى المحلي والإقليمي والعالمي، حيث تتيح المجال لتبادل الخبرات ومواجهة التحديات. وتنفذ هذه الجلسات على المستوى الإقليمي وبمشاركة الخبراء والمختصين في المؤسسات الوطنية والعربية والدولية، وبالتعاون مع شركائنا الاستراتيجيين الذين يتواجدون معنا اليوم، ممثلين بمكتب اليونسكو للتربية في الدول العربية ببيروت، ومكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج، والمركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم، وغيرهم من المنظمات الإقليمية والدولية. الأخوة والأخوات الحضور، قبل أقل من عام من اليوم لم يكن لأحد ليتخيل عمق التجربة التعليمية التي تغيرت بشكل جذري بعد جائحة كوفيد-19. فالواقع الجديد قد قلب موازين العديد من عناصر العملية التعليمية. هو مؤقت بلا شك، ولكن هل تأثيراته مؤقتة؟ بلا شك أن الجواب هو لا. فالمنظومة التعليمية برمتها لن تعود كما كانت قبل الجائحة، ومن أهم أركان المنظومة التي تأثرت هو المعلم، فقد تغير واقع المعلم وتغيرت التوقعات المطلوبة منه. وهذا ما سوف نناقشه في سويعات تجمعنا بكم في هذا الحوار، حوار سياسات المعلمين في الدول العربية، الواقع والتطلعات. تتباين دول وطننا العربي في الإمكانيات والتحديات التي تواجهها، لذا فإن تبادل التجارب والخبرات فيما بينها قد يكون الأكثر ثراء من أي منطقة جغرافية أخرى في العالم، وهو الذي سيحقق بالحوار الفائدة الأكبر في نقل المعرفة والاستفادة مما حدث وتأثر به عشرات الملايين من الطلاب والمعلمين والخبراء. وإن لم يتصدى خبراء التربية والتعليم لهذا التحدي فمن سوف يفعل؟ سوف نعمل سوياً وسوف ننجح سوياً إن شاء الله. ويسعدنا في افتتاح هذا الحوار الترحيب بمعالي حسين بن إبراهيم الحمادي، وزير التربية والتعليم بدولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة ورئيس مجلس إدارة المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي، ليحدثنا حديث الخبير الذي ساق الخطة الاستراتيجية للتعليم في ضوء توجهات القيادة السياسية بدولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة، الرامية إلى تعليم ابتكاري لمجتمع معرفي ريادي عالمي. فليتفضل معاليه مشكورا.
أصحاب المعالي والسعادة التربويين الأفاضل، تسمعوني؟
واضح.
نعم معالي، واضح. نعم.
أصحاب المعالي والسعادة التربويين الأفاضل، الأخوة والأخوات، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. إخواني، لمن داعي سروري اليوم نشارككم اليوم في هذا الحوار والنقاش حول السياسات التعليمية تحت عنوان سياسات المعلمين في الدول العربية، الواقع والتطلعات. إخواني وأخواتي، هذا الملف هذا مهم جدا، ينبع أن أهميته عن كونه مدخل نحو استدامة التعليم في الوطن العربي، وكذلك تحسين وتجويد مخرجاته، وبناء أجيال إن شاء الله متمكنة من المعارف والعلوم المختلفة من خلال إيجاد الصيغة التربوية الملائمة، حتى نتمكن إن شاء الله أن يكون عندنا الريادة في التعليم في المنطقة. وعندما نتكلم عن التعليم ومسارات نجاحه يجب أن نستذكر الأيادي البيضاء لسيدي صاحب السمو الشيخ الدكتور سلطان بن محمد القاسمي، عضو المجلس الأعلى حاكم الشارقة، لرعايته لهذا الحدث المهم، وكذلك على ما يقدمه من عطاء ودعم كبير للتعليم وطلبة العلم، بجانب المبادرات الكثيرة والبرامج النوعية والصروح التعليمية التي تسهو بها إمارة الشارقة الإمارة الباسمة. كذلك رعايته واهتمامه ومتابعته لأعمال المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي في الشارقة، فكل الشكر والتقدير والعرفان بسموه على الدعم المستمر. الأخوة والأخوات، هناك واقع. أي نظام تعليمي يعمل معزول عن التغيير لا يمكن له أن يواكب متطلبات سوق المستقبل ولا التغييرات السريعة التي تحدث في العالم. هذا النظام سوف يبقى في دائرة مغلقة لا تجديد فيها ولا نهضة حقيقية في النتاجات التربوية الرائدة التي نطمح جميعا ونلتقي من أجلها وتحقيق توجيهات قيادتنا الرشيدة في دولنا. ومن هذا المنطلق عملنا في دولة الإمارات على بلورة رؤية تعليمية حديثة مؤسسة ومرتكزة على المعلم المهاري المدرك لمسؤولياته القادر على تقديم الإضافة ويمتلك الشغف والطموح والإبداع. ومن أجل تحقيق هذه الرؤية اهتمت الوزارة في ترسيخ الأهداف الموضوعة بعناية من خلال اعتماد التدريب التخصصي والمستمر لجميع المعلمين في دولة الإمارات. ولله الحمد أطلقنا رخصة المعلم التي تعتبر بمثابة عبور المعلم إلى سلك التعليم، تشمل المعايير والقدرات والكفاءات، وكان في استفادة كبيرة ولله الحمد من التجربة في المملكة العربية السعودية في هذا المجال والدول الأخرى. كذلك ركزنا على الخبرات التي نبحث أن يتمكن منها المعلم حسب المادة التي يدرسها والمرحلة. كذلك عندنا منظومة لضمان استمرار التغذية الراجعة للمعلم حول المستجدات والأساليب الحديثة والتعلم الذكي. وكذلك ربطنا المعلمين بالزيارات والتعاون مع بيوت خبرة عالمية لاستكشاف أساليب وابتكارات في التعليم وكيف استشراف المستقبل للتعليم، وكذلك تحقيق الكفاءات اللازمة له. المعلم إخواني يجب أن نعترف أنه شريك أساسي في التعليم، وهو مساهم فعال في وضع أي سياسات في منظومة التعليم وكذلك في تطوير منظومة التعليم. نحن في الإمارات نثق ثقة كبيرة به ودوره الكبير في إنجاح تطوير منظومة التعليم في الإمارات. العالم كله مر ونحن عايشنا هذا الوضع كوفيد 19 كما أشارت أخت مهرة، ومن خلال هذه الكوفيد 19 والجائحة برزت حاجات ومستجدات جديدة تعليمية وأساليب وممارسات لم نكن نتعرف عليها وإنما ابتكرت خلال هذه المرحلة الحرجة وفي ظل هذه الجائحة، ومست شريحة كبيرة من أبنائنا الطلبة في العالم كامل. ولله الحمد في دولة الإمارات وبسبب الاستباقية تمكنا من اجتياز هذه الجائحة بناء على استثمار تم من قبل عقد من الزمان في مشروع أطلقه سيدي صاحب السمو الشيخ محمد بن راشد المكتوم، وهو مشروع محمد بن راشد التعلم الذكي، في بناء منظومة تعلم ذكي قادرة على العمل في جميع الظروف. طبعا هذه المنظومة تم تطويرها والاستفادة من التجارب في دول عديدة وكانت دائما في تحديث مستمر، ولن نصل إلى هذه المرحلة من النضج والكفاءة والجودة إلا إذا كان في تعاون وتبادل الخبرات بين المؤسسات الحكومية والخاصة وكذلك مع الدول الأخرى. وهذا اللقاء هو يبين أهمية هذا التعاون وتبادل الخبرات في كيف نعمل معا في إيجاد والانتقال إلى مرحلة مستقبلية إن شاء الله بعد كوفيد 19. في الإمارات أطلقنا الخطة المئوية 2071 وفيها مستهدفات مستقبلية، وهدف أساسي فيها أن التعليم في دولة الإمارات يصل إلى الرقم 1، ولن نصل إلى ذلك إلا بالتعاون وتبادل الخبرات والعمل كفرق متشارك مع بعض. فأشكر لكم وجودكم معنا اليوم وتعاونكم معنا، وهذا هو سبيل النجاح لنا كدول عربية إن شاء الله في الوصول إلى مراحل متقدمة في جودة التعليم وتطوير مهارات المعلمين ووضع سياسات تناسب أوضاعنا كذلك. في الختام أود أن نكرر شكري لمقام صاحب السمو الشيخ الدكتور سلطان بن محمد القاسمي عضو المجلس الأعلى حاكم الشارقة على رعايته واهتمامه بشؤون التعليم وتشريفنا برعايته لهذا المؤتمر. وكذلك أشكر من منظمة اليونسكو ممثلة بمكتب بيروت مكتب العربي، وكذلك المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي بالشارقة، والمركز اليونسكو الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم في المملكة العربية السعودية، وكذلك مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج، وإسهامات أخي الدكتور علي القرني المستمرة دائما وحرصه المستمر على رفع الجودة وتطوير المعايير. وفي النهاية أتمنى لكم التوفيق إن شاء الله، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
نشكر معالي حسين الحمادي على كلمته التي أعطانا فيها نبذة عن جهود دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة ووزارة التربية والتعليم في مجال دعم وتمكين المعلم وتطوير السياسات الخاصة به والخطط المستقبلية لوزارة التربية والتعليم. والآن يشرفنا دعوة معالي الدكتور عبد الرحمن بن محمد العاصمي نائب وزير التعليم لإلقاء الكلمة وزارة التعليم بالمملكة العربية السعودية ولكي يمنحنا إضاءات عن جهود وزارة التعليم ومسيرة التطور فيها، فليتفضل مشكورا. تفضل دكتور عبد الرحمن.
الميكروفون دكتور عبد الرحمن.
دكتور عبد الرحمن الميكروفون ميوت.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين نبينا محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. معالي أخي الدكتور حسين الحمادي وزير التعليم في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، السادة والسيدات، الخبراء والمتحدثين والمشاركين، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدني ونيابة عن معالي أخي وزير التعليم الدكتور حمد بن محمد آل الشيخ المشاركة في هذه الندوة الإقليمية التي ستتناول سياسات المعلمين في الدول العربية، الواقع والتطلعات. أيها الحضور، إن التحديات التي تواجه عالمنا اليوم وبخاصة تلك المتعلقة بالتنمية المستدامة لا تمثل تحديات وطنية فحسب، بل هي تحديات إقليمية وعالمية تضع التعليم في كل الدول أمام مسؤوليات تتطلب التجديد في غاياته وأساليبه، لدرجة جعلت صناع السياسات التعليمية والخبراء والمعلمين يدركون اليوم ضرورة توحيد جهود نظم التعليم في العالم لتأسيس معلمين لديهم المهارات والقدرات الضرورية لمواجهة هذه التحديات. الأمر الذي يتطلب منا جميعا العمل على إعادة التفكير في نظم التعليم وسياساته وبرامج إعداد المعلم ومراقبة مستوى نواتجه وجودتها. وقد كان إقرار وزراء التعليم العرب في شهر سبتمبر من هذا العام لوثيقة تطوير التعليم في العالم العربي تأكيداً واضحاً على المضي قدماً لتعزيز هذا التضامن في مجال إصلاح وتطوير التعليم والنهوض به في جميع مراحله ومجالاته، وبالخصوص برامج تطوير المعلم. أيها الحضور، تأتي أهمية حوار السياسات الخاصة بالمعلمين والعمل على تطويرها الشمولي ومراجعة الأنظمة التعليمية لتعكس الرغبة المشتركة عند الجميع في الارتقاء بجودة التعليم وتحقيق تميزه، والإسهام في تحقيق غايات الهدف الرابع من أهداف التنمية المستدامة، وتطوير التوجهات والسياسات والممارسات التربوية بصورة تجسد الطموحات المشتركة نحو توسيع نطاق الجهود المبذولة في مجال الترويج العالمي لسياسات المعلمين ودورها الحيوي في تعزيز جودة الأنظمة التعليمية التي تواجه اليوم صدمة لم تكن متوقعة في دول العالم كافة، تتمثل في إغلاق المدارس والتحول المفاجئ إلى نظام التعليم الإلكتروني بسبب تداعيات جائحة كورونا. وجميعنا على يقين أن دور التقنية في التعليم لن يقف عند حدود الموجود حاليا، بل سيتضاعف في المستقبل، وسيكون للموارد الرقمية دور كبير في تغيير طريقة التعليم والتعلم وفق منهجية تمكن الطلاب من الوصول إلى المحتوى العلمي الرقمي وتعظم الاستفادة من التواصل الواسع محليا وإقليميا وعالميا. ومن خلال المناقشات في اجتماعات حوار السياسات نأمل أن يتوصل المشاركون في الندوة إلى توصيات ونتائج تعزز بوجه عام جودة الأنظمة التعليمية في الدول العربية، وتطور بوجه خاص جانب سياسات المعلمين وبرامج إعدادهم، سواء من حيث إعدادها وتطبيقها وتقييمها وتحسينها المستمر، وذلك لتسريع وتيرة تقدم الدول نحو تحقيق الهدف الرابع من أهداف التنمية المستدامة. أيها الحضور، إن مبادرات حكومة المملكة العربية السعودية في التعاون مع اليونسكو لإنشاء المركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم تعد حلقة وصل بين المنظمات لضمان منح التعليم صفة الجودة والتميز المأمول، وتأتي ضمن سعيها المستمر للإسهام في تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة الرامية إلى تحقيق مستقبل عالمي مشترك يسوده السلام والخير والنماء للجميع. وقد حصلت المملكة العربية السعودية على مقعد الرئاسة المشتركة لمجموعة العمل الدولية للمعلمين التابعة لمنظمة اليونسكو مشاركة مع دولة النرويج، وذلك بدعم مستمر ورعاية مباشرة من حكومتنا الرشيدة بقيادة سيدي خادم الحرمين الشريفين الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز آل سعود، وسمو سيدي ولي عهده الأمين صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير محمد بن سلمان بن عبد العزيز آل سعود حفظهم الله. الأمر الذي يعكس الحضور الفاعل والمؤثر للمملكة في المنظمات واللجان الدولية في مسارات التعليم والتربية، ودورها الريادي في رفع مستوى جودة النظم التعليمية على كافة الأصعدة الإقليمية والدولية، ويوضح الدعم غير المحدود الذي توليه القيادة الرشيدة في المملكة أيدها الله للتعليم ورفع مكانة المعلمين وتعزيز الجودة وترسيخ التميز في العملية التعليمية محليا وإقليميا. وفي الختام نؤكد اعتزازنا بشراكتكم وبمشاركتكم في هذا الحوار الريادي الهادف إلى دعم المعلمين وتهيئة كافة السبل لتعزيز مكانة مهنة التعليم وزيادة جاذبيتها من خلال تطوير السياسات المتعلقة بتوفير بيئات تعليمية ملهمة للمعلمين. ويسعدني أن أقدم جزيل الشكر إلى جميع القائمين على هذه الندوة، والشكر موصول للمركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي بدولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة، ولمكتب اليونسكو الإقليمي للدول العربية ببيروت، ولمكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج، وللمركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم بالمملكة العربية السعودية للجهود المشتركة لعقد هذه الندوة النوعية. كما لا يفوتني شكر جميع الباحثين والخبراء والمعلمين المشاركين، سائلين الله تعالى للجميع التوفيق والسداد. والشكر موصول لراعي هذا الملتقى صاحب السمو الشيخ الدكتور سلطان القاسمي على رعايته ودعمه لعقد هذه الندوة، متمنين للجميع ولهذه الندوة التوفيق والنجاح. والسلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
نشكر معالي الدكتور عبد الرحمن بن محمد العاصمي على كلمته التي ذكر فيها أن معالجة التحديات تبدأ من خلال التعاون والشراكة على المستوى الوطني والإقليمي، وبما أن تطوير المعلم يبدأ بتطوير السياسات وإدراك دورها في تعزيز أنظمة التعليم وتحقيق الهدف الرابع من أهداف التنمية المستدامة، وجهود المملكة في التعاون والتنسيق مع المنظمة اليونسكو بما يعزز أنظمة التعليم على مستوى العالم. ولما كان التعليم مكونا مركبا يزداد تعقيدا يوما بعد يوم، فما بالكم في حال التعليم في ظل جائحة كوفيد-19 وتأثير هذه الجائحة على مكونات الأنظمة التعليمية في الدول العربية. فإنني باسمكم أدعو أستاذنا الدكتور حمد بن سيف الهمامي صاحب الخبرة الممتدة بالتعليم في دول مجلس التعاون والدول العربية، مدير عام مكتب اليونسكو للتربية في الدول العربية ببيروت، ليشاركنا واقع التعليم العربي ويعلمنا بآخر المستجدات في هذا الإطار، فليتفضل مشكورا.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أصحاب المعالي الوزراء، معالي الدكتور مدير عام مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج، أصحاب السعادة زملائي مدراء مراكز اليونسكو من الفئة الثانية، زملائي الأعزاء، سيداتي سادتي، بعد الشكر والتقدير لصاحب الرعاية الكريمة صاحب السمو الشيخ الدكتور سلطان بن محمد القاسمي عضو المجلس الأعلى للاتحاد حاكم الشارقة، يسرني أن أرحب بكم جميعا في هذه الندوة الهامة عن بعد حول سياسات ومهام وممارسات المعلمين في البلدان العربية. وبهذه المناسبة أتوجه بالشكر لكل من المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي رسب، والمركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم RCQE، ومكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج أبج، وزملائي في مكتب اليونسكو في بيروت على الجهود المشتركة التي بذلوها في التحضير لإحياء هذه الندوة والتركيز على المعلمين في منطقتنا العربية. وقد تم التركيز على المعلمين نظرا لدورهم الكبير في تحقيق أهداف التعليم هدف التعليم SDG 4 ومساهمتهم الكبيرة في الحفاظ على جودة التعليم للجميع في سياق أزمة كوفيد-19 كورونا الحالية. وكما هو معلوم لدينا جميعا، نعقد ونعول الكثير من الآمال على المعلمين، وننتظر منهم تلبية توقعات كثيرة ومعقدة أحيانا، ولذلك هم بحاجة إلى الكثير من الدعم على كافة الجهات المعنية أو من كافة الجهات المعنية بالتعليم، من وزارات التعليم ومؤسسات التطوير والتدريب وكليات التربية والمدراء والزملاء وأولياء الأمور والمجتمع عامة. ومن المعلوم أيضا أن سياسات التعليم ومن ضمنها تلك الخاصة بالمعلمين مهمة تحديد الأدوار والكفاءات المتوقعة من المعلم، فضلا عن أنسب أدوات سياسات التعليم يمكن أن تساعدهم للقيام بالإداء المطلوب. وحري بالذكر أن بلداننا العربية لا تفتقر للمراجع والوثائق والسياسات المكتوبة الخاصة بالمعلمين، ولكن ما زلنا بحاجة إلى دعم وتطوير أداء المعلم، ويمكن القيام بذلك من خلال أولاً تعزيز سياسات المعلمين التطلعية في ضوء المعطيات الموجودة، وذلك من خلال بحث شامل في هذا المجال، وثانياً تحسين تنفيذ هذه السياسات على مختلف المستويات، بما في ذلك عبر الرصد والتقييم المستمرين ومتابعة الأداء. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة سيداتي سادتي، أرجو أن تساعدنا هذه الندوة الافتراضية عبر الإنترنت في تحديد سياسات المعلمين وممارساتهم الواعدة، وتحديد المعوقات الأساسية التي تعيق تطوير وتنفيذ سياسة المعلمين الناجحة والفعالة في منطقتنا العربية. ونحن كيونسكو نشدد على أهمية المشاركة والتعليم من الآخرين، ونرجو أن تكون هذه الندوة فرصة للاستفادة والتعلم من خبرات الآخرين كي نبني على ما تم إنجازه دون الاضطرار إلى البدء من جديد. ولقد وضعت أزمة كوفيد-19 الكثير من الضغوط على أنظمة التعليم في جميع أنحاء العالم بما في ذلك بلداننا العربية، إلا أنها أعادت وضع مهنة التعليم في مقدمة النقاشات العامة، وربما ساعدت الأزمة المستجدة الكثير من الناس من أهل ومدراء وإدارات التعليم على مختلف المستويات وإعلاميين على فهم دور المعلمين والتحديات الرئيسة التي يواجهونها، مثل إتقان التدريس والتعلم عن بعد وعبر الإنترنت، واحتياجات التطوير المهني الخاصة بهم التي تشمل الدعم النفسي وتدابير أخرى. إن هذه الأزمة عززت الاعتراف بدور المعلمين الكبير والهام، وعلى الرغم من أنهم ليسوا العامل الوحيد في ضمان النجاح التعليمي، إلا أنهم أي المعلمين يشكلون العامل الأساسي في الحفاظ على استمرارية التعلم وعلى تماسك نظام التعليم والمجتمعات ككل. في ضوء ما سبق، أحيي هذه المبادرة التي جاءت في الوقت المناسب لتسليط الضوء على سياسات وممارسات المعلمين في منطقتنا العربية، كما أحيي الشركاء والمنظمين على حماسهم المتجدد وعلى تضمين المبادرة نتائج حديثة لمختلف البحوث العالمية والإقليمية والوطنية ومبادرات المعلمين. كما إنني سعيد جدا بتعاوننا المكثف والمثمر مع مراكزنا في المنطقة، أي مراكز اليونسكو من الفئة الثانية، مثل المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي ريسب، والمركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم RCQE، وشريكنا النشط في دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي وخارجها مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج أبجز. لقد تعودنا دائما على التعاون مع شركائنا، لكن هذه الأزمة الحالية وطرق العمل عبر الإنترنت سمحت لنا بتكثيف تعاوننا التقليدي على أساس متابعة طرق جديدة ومبتكرة. فمنذ آذار مارس الماضي عملنا معا في قضايا مهمة مثل التعليم والتعلم عن بعد، الدعم النفسي والاجتماعي، والحفاظ على التركيز على الجودة في ضوء الهدف الرابع من أهداف التنمية المستدامة. وكما تم التأكيد في الاجتماع الوزاري الأخير الذي عقد عبر الويب الأسبوع الفائت حول العودة إلى التعليم في الدول العربية في العام الدراسي 2021. نحن بحاجة إلى تعزيز تعاوننا الإقليمي، ونحن بحاجة إلى بذل المزيد من الطاقات لتحديد أفضل السبل التي تمكننا أن تستفيد منها الدول من المبادرات والأساليب المبتكرة في بلداننا وفي جميع أنحاء العالم. لذا أرجو أن تساعدنا هذه الندوة على الاستجابة للتطلعات ورغبات أصحاب المعالي وزراء التربية والتعليم في الدول العربية في توفير مجموعة من الخبرات والموارد للجميع في أقرب وقت ممكن. وأخيراً أنتهز هذه المناسبة لأتوجه بتحية شكر وتقدير للمعلمين في العالم ومنطقتنا العربية بشكل خاص على جهودهم ومثابرتهم لتعليم أبنائنا ومتابعة رسالتهم المقدسة رغم الظروف الصعبة والاستثنائية. وأتطلع أن تكون هذه الندوة فرصة لمناقشات ونتائج مثمرة تساعدنا جميعاً لدعم وتطوير المعلمين في بلداننا بأفضل ما لدينا من قدرات. وشكراً.
شكراً دكتور حمد. شكراً على هذه الكلمة التي أكدت فيها لنا أن سياسات التعليم ومن ضمنها سياسات المعلم هي شأن للكل، والسياسات في الدول العربية موجودة، ولكن نحتاج إلى تعزيز هذه السياسات من خلال البحث وتقييمها ومتابعة الأداء وتحديد المعوقات والتحديات التي تواجه تطبيق سياسات المعلم، وما أفرزته الأزمة من إدراك لأهمية دور المعلم في العملية التعليمية وإعادة تعريف لهذا الدور. والآن اسمحوا لي باسمكم جميعاً أن أدعو معالي الدكتور علي القرني المدير العام لمكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج ليقدم لنا كلمة مستوحاة من واقع التجربة الميدانية بكل تحدياتها وإنجازاتها والمعرفة الخبيرة بشؤون التعليم في دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي، فليتفضل مشكورا.
شكرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صاحب المعالي حسين بن إبراهيم الحمادي وزير التربية والتعليم في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة، صاحب المعالي الدكتور عبد الرحمن بن محمد العاصمي نائب وزير التعليم في المملكة العربية السعودية، زملائي وزميلاتي مدير المنظمات المشاركة، الأخوات والإخوة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أود قبل كل شيء تقديم أسمى عبارة الشكر والتقدير لصاحب السمو الشيخ الدكتور سلطان بن محمد القاسمي عضو المجلس الأعلى حاكم الشارقة على رعايته لهذا الملتقى حول سياسات المعلمين في الدول العربية، وليس هذا بغريب على سموه الكريم. والشكر موصول لوزارتي التربية والتعليم في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة والمملكة العربية السعودية على إضفاء معنى أعمق وقيمة أعلى لهذا الحوار. ولا يفوتني بالطبع أن أشكر زملائي وزميلاتي في المنظمات المشاركة في التنظيم، سعادة الدكتور حمد الهمامي المدير العام لمكتب اليونسكو الإقليمي للدول العربية، وسعادة الأستاذة مهرة المطيوعي مديرة المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي، وسعادة الدكتور عبد الرحمن مدير المركز الإقليمي للجودة في التربية والتعليم. وبعد، فإن الحوار حول المعلم هو الحوار الأهم، ومهما شرقنا أو غربنا ومهما أنفقنا على المناهج والبرامج فإنه لن يطور التعليم سوى المعلم. وحتى في وقت جائحة كورونا كوفيد-19 تبين أن المعلم هو الركن الركين مهما كانت بيئة التعليم. وإنه لا يفخر مكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج بتوجيه من أصحاب المعالي أعضاء مؤتمره العام بما وفره للمعلم من دعم في المحتوى الفكري التربوي، وأتاح له الوقوف على أحدث المستجدات في الممارسات التربوية، ووفر له التدريب ومحتواه. ولا يمكنني في هذا السياق الوفاء بما قدمه المكتب في هذا الخصوص. وإننا لنأمل أن ينتج حوار هذا الملتقى عن إضافة لبنة قوية في بناء سياسات فاعلة للمعلمين في الدول الأعضاء بصفة خاصة وفي العالم العربي بصفة عامة. وأخيرا تحية وعرفان للخبراء المتحدثين في هذا الحوار، وشكر لا ينتهي لتعاونهم وحرصهم على إثراء الحوار بما يمتلكونه من تجارب وخبرات. وشكرا للحضور الكريم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا دكتور علي على هذه الكلمة التي أكدت فيها على أهمية المعلم كركن ركين في المنظومة التعليمية، وأهمية دوره في تطوير التعليم، ودور مكتب التربية العربي الذي نثمنه جميعا في دول الخليج في تطوير المعلم وتطوير المنظومة التعليمية في دولنا. وكلنا كنا خريجين من برامج مكتب التربية العربي، واستفدنا منها وأفادتنا وأضافت الكثير لنا من الخبرات. ونختم جلساتنا الافتتاحية بكلمة من سعادة الدكتور عبد الرحمن المديريس مدير عام المركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم ليشاركنا تفاصيل دراسة متخصصة قام بها المركز تتعلق بسياسات المعلمين، فليتفضل مشكورا. تفضل دكتور عبد الرحمن.
شكرا أستاذ مهرة، يعطيكم العافية. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على معلم البشرية محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحبه أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم. صاحب المعالي الأخ حسين بن إبراهيم الحمادي وزير التربية والتعليم في الإمارات العربية المتحدة، صاحب المعالي الدكتور عبد الرحمن بن محمد العاصمي نائب وزير التعليم في المملكة العربية السعودية، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الأخوة والأخوات الباحثين والخبراء والمتحدثين والمشاركين، أحييكم بتحية الإسلام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. في البداية نتقدم بخالص الشكر والتقدير لصاحب السمو الشيخ الدكتور سلطان بن محمد القاسمي عضو المجلس الأعلى للاتحاد حاكم الشارقة على رعاية هذه الندوة الإقليمية النوعية في وقت استثنائي وغير عادي في تاريخ التعليم على إثر تداعيات جائحة كورونا على نظم التعليم. الأخوة والأخوات، إذا كانت الجودة هي جوهر التعليم كما أكدت ذلك تقارير اليونسكو، يبقى المعلمون هم الملهمون لجودة التعليم والتعلم الآن وفي المستقبل. إن جعل مهنة التعليم أكثر جاذبية وتوفير بيئات مبتكرة للمعلمين لتمكينهم من إلهام الطلاب لتعزيز جودة تعليمهم وغير ذلك من معايير الجودة تتطلب سياسات نوعية ذات جودة عالية تستجيب وتستبق الاحتياجات المتغيرة للمعلمين. وتأتي أهمية حوار السياسات الخاصة بالمعلمين في الدول العربية الواقع والتطلعات إلى تحديد الممارسات والسياسات المتعلقة بالمعلمين والعمل على تطويرها لتعزيز سياسات المعلمين في أنظمة التعليم في الدول العربية للارتقاء المستمر بجودة التعليم وتميزه والمساهمة في تحقيق غايات الهدف الرابع من أهداف التنمية المستدامة. ومن هذا المنطلق ولدعم تحقيق هذه الغايات ودور مركز اليونسكو الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم في تعزيز جودة وتميز سياسات التعليم في الدول العربية من خلال العديد من البرامج والمشروعات الاستراتيجية، قام المركز بإعداد دراستين ميدانيتين على مستوى الدول العربية. تناولت الدراسة الأولى السياسات الخاصة بالمعلمين في الأنظمة التعليمية في الدول العربية، والدراسة الثانية بعنوان دراسات سياسات وبرامج التنمية المهنية أثناء الخدمة للمعلم في الدول العربية. وتوصلت تلك الدراستين لعدد من النتائج والتوصيات الهامة التي نأمل أن تجد طريقة للتنفيذ لتعزيز جودة وتميز التعليم في المؤسسات التعليمية بالعالم العربي. وسيتم بمشيئة الله تقديم تلك الدراسات ونتائجها وتوصياتها في هذه الندوة، كما نتطلع بإذن الله من خلال مناقشات وتبادل الأفكار والرؤى الأوراق العلمية المطروحة وورش العمل التوصل إلى توصيات ومبادرات مبتكرة تسهم في إثراء الندوة. الأخوة والأخوات، إن حكومة المملكة العربية السعودية تحت القيادة الرشيدة لخادم الحرمين الشريفين وسمو ولي عهده الأمين حفظهم الله تولي قضية التعليم اهتماما خاصا في سياساتها الداعمة للدول العربية بشكل عام وقضية جودة التعليم بشكل خاص، كما تبذل المملكة العربية السعودية ممثلة في وزارة التعليم جهودا حثيثة لإحداث تطوير مستمر في فلسفة التعليم من خلال التعاون مع المنظمات والهيئات الدولية والإقليمية المعنية بتعزيز دور التعليم في التنمية المستدامة. ختاما، أشكر حكومتنا الرشيدة بقيادة خادم الحرمين الشريفين الملك سلمان بن عبد العزيز وسمو ولي عهده الأمين صاحب السمو الملكي الأمير محمد بن سلمان بن عبد العزيز حفظهم الله على توجيهاتهم السديدة لدعم منظومة التعليم وجودته. كما أشكر معالي وزير التعليم رئيس مجلس إدارة مركز اليونسكو الإقليمي للجودة والتميز في التعليم الدكتور حمد بن محمد آل الشيخ، والشكر موصول لمعالي الدكتور عبد الرحمن بن محمد العاصمي نائب وزير التعليم على مشاركته نيابة عن معالي الوزير، والشكر لكافة شركائنا الاستراتيجيين لعقد هذه الندوة وهم المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي ولمكتب اليونسكو الإقليمي للتربية في الدول العربية في بيروت ولمكتب التربية العربي لدول الخليج. كما لا يفوتني أن أشكر الباحثين والخبراء والمتحدثين المشاركين على حضورهم ومشاركتهم الفاعلة في هذه الندوة الإقليمية. كما أشكر في هذه المناسبة المعلمين والمعلمات وأعضاء هيئة التدريس وأولياء أمور الطلبة، والشكر موصول لفريق العمل على الإعداد والتحضير لهذه الندوة، مع التذكير والتذكر دائما وأبدا أن المعلمون أو المعلمين هم الصناع الحقيقيون لجودة التعليم الآن وفي المستقبل، لأنهم نذروا أنفسهم لزرع الأمل والسلام في العقول، سائلا الله العزيز القدير أن يوفق الجميع لما يحبه ويرضاه. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
نشكر الدكتور عبد الرحمن المديريس على النبذة التي أعطانا إياها حول الدراسات التي قام بها المركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز، وبإذن الله سوف تستفيد الدول العربية من توصيات هذه الدراسات ونتائجها في تطبيق سياسات المعلمين وتحديثها. نختتم الآن الجلسة الافتتاحية بشكر موجه من المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي لحكومة دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة على الدعم الدائم لمبادرات ومشاريع المركز، وكذلك الشكر الخاص لمعالي حسين الحمادي رئيس مجلس إدارة المركز على تواصله الدائم معنا وسعيه الدائم لكي يتطور العمل ولكي يكون رقعة الاستفادة من برامج المركز على المستوى الوطني العربي جميعا. وهذه الشراكة ما كانت لتتحقق، وهذا الحوار ما كان ليتحقق لولا الدعم الدائم من حكومة دولة الإمارات ومعالي حسين الحمادي، ورعاية خاصة من صاحب السمو الشيخ سلطان بن محمد القاسمي. مع اختتام جلستنا الافتتاحية ننتقل للجلسة الأولى من جلسات الحوار، وندعو الدكتور عبد الرحمن المديريس لإدارة هذه الجلسة والترحيب بالمتحدثين. كما نؤكد على الأخوة المشاركين بأن الترجمة تتوفر لهذا الحوار، كما أن نؤكد عليهم أن هناك سوف في ختام كل جلسة سوف يكون وقت مخصص للأسئلة وطرح الأسئلة، فيرجى طرحها عن طريق الضغط على زر question and answer وطرح الأسئلة، حيث سوف يقوم مدير الجلسة بأخذ الأسئلة وطرحها على المتحدثين. كذلك أشكر معالي الوزراء لحضورهم ورعايتهم، معالي الدكتور معالي حسين الحمادي وزير التربية والتعليم، معالي الدكتور عبد الرحمن العاصمي، دكتور علي القرني، دكتور حمد الهمامي. وجودكم اليوم وافتتاحكم لهذا الحوار أعطانا دفعة بإذن الله الاستمرار في العمل والتنسيق بشكل مستمر والتعاون الجهود لمصلحة أنظمة التعليم في وطننا العربي، وبالأخص المعلم الذي أكد الجميع هنا على أهميته وبأنه هو العنصر والمحرك الأساسي في العملية التعليمية. نشكركم جميعا.
دكتور عبد الرحمن.
شكرا أستاذة مهرة، وشكرا أصحاب المعالي والسعادة على كلماتهم الضافية. والآن نأتي للجلسة الأولى، ونعدكم بإذن الله تعالى كما هو في الجدول. سنلتزم بإذن الله تعالى بالجودة 12 و20 دقيقة، سنتوقف بحول الله وقوته في نهاية هذه الجلسة حتى نكون مطبقين إن شاء الله للجودة.
دكتور 12 و20 دقيقة بتوقيت السعودية.
بتوقيت السعودية أكيد، الله يسلمك ويحفظك الدكتور، أكيد طعمك حسب الموجود في البرنامج. عندنا الجلسة الأولى هي بسياسات المعلم الإقليمية والدولية، وعندنا ورقتين عمل. الورقة الأولى تقدمها أو عنوانها مبادرات اليونسكو العالمية والإقليمية لسياسات المعلمين، والمتحدثة هي الدكتورة داكمار جورجسكو، هي أخصائية برامج تعليمية في المناهج والمعلمين في مكتب اليونسكو الإقليمي للتربية في الدول العربية بيروت. سيرتها الذاتية سيرة عطرة، لكن نحاول نختصر بإذن الله تعالى عشان الوقت. الدكتورة داكمار حاصلة على شهادة الدكتوراه في الفلسفة، عملت كمستشارة لوزير التعليم في وزارة التربية الوطنية في الرومانية في إصلاح التعليم في أوائل التسعينات وعام أيضا 2000، وساهمت أيضا في العديد من العمليات طويلة المدى لإصلاح المناهج التعليمية، وتحت رعاية منظمات دولية في اليونيسيف واليونسكو ومجلس أوروبا والبنك الدولي. انضمت الدكتورة داكمار إلى مكتب اليونسكو الإقليمي للتربية في الدول العربية كأخصائية برامج مسؤولة عن المناهج والمعلمين والتعليم العالي. تعمل حالياً على تنسيق برامج المكتب الإقليمي للتعلم والمناهج والتعليم. طبعاً هي مؤلفة لعدد من الكتب دراسية في مجال تخصصها الفلسفة، ولديها العديد من المقالات السيرة الذاتية مثل ما ذكرت عطرة، ولكن لضيق الوقت سنلتزم بإذن الله تعالى في حدود 15 دقيقة. دكتور دكمارة لديك 15 دقيقة لتقديم ورقتك، تفضلي دكتورة. وأؤكد على الجميع بإذن الله تعالى في المداخلات أو التساؤلات، حبذا يعني عندكم أي بوينتين للأسئلة أو المداخلات، فحتى نعطي فرصة بإذن الله تعالى في حدود ربع ساعة للأسئلة والأجوبة بإذن الله تعالى من المتحدثين. شكرا لكم. تفضلي دكتورة دكمارة.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Sabah al-khair. I will try to share my screen. I don't know if this is working. So can I share my screen? Okay. Can you see it?
No, we cannot. No, we cannot.
Yes, now?
Yes. Okay.
Yes, okay. So I'll try to maximize it. Okay. So I can start, I guess. I gathered the idea of 15 minutes. I will try to make it shorter than intended. Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to start the technical discussions on this very hot topic of teacher policies. Because, as you know, we talk about the role of teachers for quite some time, but now with this COVID crisis, the important, crucial role of teachers came to the forefront in a very obvious way. My presentation is about some of the UNESCO initiatives at global and regional level. And I would like to structure this few minutes into 4 points. So first, why a focus on teachers? Secondly, how to enhance teacher policies? What is UNESCO doing? How is UNESCO supporting our member states? Then some words about teacher professional development. And then finally, to end up with some examples of communities of practice that are active the world over and also in our regions. Why a focus on teachers first? As you know, from 2000 to 2015, we've gone through the EFA process, Education for All, where the focus was more on access. Now we are almost halfway the Agenda 2030 process that is focused both on access, but also more on quality. And as all the speakers, Their Excellency before me mentioned, teachers are one important factor, if not the essential factor in ensuring quality. They are not the only factor, but their role is really crucial in many respects. As you all know, those working in education, we deal with these 10 targets that are named SDG 4 targets, Sustainable Development Goals for education. And teachers, they play a role in all of the attainment of all of these targets, from quality to access to gender equality to sustainable development to global citizenship education. And that's why countries are urged to actually make sure that we have the supplies of qualified teachers. And one special goal is to enhance the teacher qualification during this period. Teachers, as all who work in education, have actually two functions: to help learners understand their roots, but also to make them able to fly. So to connect the tradition with innovation, what is repetitive with creativity. So teacher roles, as also Dr. Hamed said, our regional director, are really very diverse, and expectations towards teachers are sometimes overwhelming. Traditionally, teachers were more associated with the question of how do we learn? What are teaching and learning methods? But nowadays, there is increasing awareness of the fact that teachers should play a more important role with regard to the why question. Why do we learn something? The goals of education, the expected outcomes, the competencies we need to develop, the what question, what is on the table, what is the content of learning, how and where do we learn, the learning environment, but also how well, so teachers' role in assessment. So teachers, they are not just those who impart knowledge, but as the COVID crisis showed, they are the ones that make sure that students are working with a structured agenda, that they are motivated, that they are counseled, that they communicate with one another, and so on. So now, of course, we learn in a new environment, which is the digital environment, but also the COVID crisis made it clear that the future of education has to be rethought, and we need to look into new needs and new environments for education and learning. We now all look into connectivity and technology, but we also have to take into account the basic needs of human beings, including teachers, that national policies need to address. So in the Arab states, to contextualize a little bit also the whole discussion about teacher policies, as you know, there are different consequences of the so-called Arab Spring movements. Then the results in international studies, they show that although countries made a lot of effort in sustaining learning and enhancing learning outcomes, the performances of learners are still above OECD average, with some exceptions, like some progresses that have been noted in countries like UAE and Qatar for the latest PISA evaluation. Then it's about this clash of different curriculum and learning concepts and the new roles of teachers that need to be more engaged, and the learning environments and all these crisis consequences that also increase the number of learners that are out of school or that drop out and they are not reached well, so that teachers have actually a lot of things to deal with, and those who deal with teacher policies as well. In terms of enhancing teacher policies, as you know, UNESCO developed, and also other agencies, a wealth of resources. So as Dr. Hamed said, it's no issue that we lack resources. We need to use them better, to know more about them. And this is one example, the Teacher Policy Development Guide that UNESCO launched in 2019. It's more a guide about how to put in place such policies, how to make them sound and sustainable, and how to look into different aspects related to teachers. So this is one possible resource. UNESCO is also interested in enhancing and furthering teacher research. This is a document from 10 years ago. I worked as an editor for this prospects issue, and here the late Professor Donald Adams, he mentioned in his editorial that he would always privilege the grassroots level research. So the role of teachers, they are closest to what is happening at school level, classroom level. They know better, and they know what is working and what not. But of course, the large scale research and the grassroots level research has to come together, to work together. And my other colleagues in this webinar will explain also some issues coming out from the global research, is the more, let's say, international studies on teachers. We know from research a lot of things we still have to learn, but we know that a lot of children do not learn. We know that what we think is teacher training sometimes is failing, and it's not the real thing. And we know that going to school does not mean learning, as being in front of a screen does not mean learning. So these are issues that teacher policies need to also consider. As we request from students to master hard skills and also soft skills and social emotional learning balanced with cognitive achievements, the same we ask for teachers. So teacher policies, they need to look into how teachers are mastering all these different aspects of learning. There are many challenges, of course, because if you look into curriculum frameworks, into assessment frameworks, what people expect from learners, it's a wealth of competencies, key competencies, transversal competencies, from developing fulfilled and happy persons to knowledgeable persons to critical thinkers and so on. So, but the same we need to address in teacher preparation. So, with regard to the teacher training and the professional development processes, UNESCO is trying very hard to address these issues from a broader perspective, a comprehensive perspective, what we call educational alignment, because it's not enough to work only with teachers or only with curriculum. It's a need to work from an alignment perspective, meaning that all these components are talking to one another. There are many other initiatives. I got it. Thank you. So there are many other initiatives, including with regard to teacher training and professional development. I just selected some of the examples, like gender mainstreaming guide in teacher training. Then UNESCO, as you know, is promoting, in collaboration with important partners like the Hamdan Foundation, the Teacher Prize for Teacher Excellencies. There are initiatives on futures of education and on education emergencies that also deal with teachers and that are inspirational for teacher policies. You can always, of course, check out our website in Beirut, but also UNESCO's website. And I will end up, this is my last slide, with regard to communities of practice. So lately, a lot of communities of practice and good platforms have been established. One that I invite you to check out is the Teacher Task Force community of practice. And there are many resources, including for COVID mastery, that was recently launched. So the platform is now available. Then a very recent collaboration in our region is with UNESCO, MENARO, and other partners, other UN agencies, that led to the development of a teacher training guide for coming back to learning, for back to learning. So my invitation is that we discussed also based on research and on experiences from countries on what are achievements with regard to teacher policies, but what are also gaps and further challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. شكرا دكتورة دكمارة على التزامك الوقت وعلى هالورقة القيمة، وبنعطيك فرصة إن شاء الله بإذن الله تعالى في الكيو ان اي ان شاء الله. الورقة الثانية الآن مع دراسات السياسات الخاصة بالمعلمين في الأنظمة التعليمية بالعالم العربي، المتحدثة دكتورة ندى منيمنة، عميد التعليم المعلمين في المعهد الوطني للتربية. الدكتورة منيمنة حاصلة على درجة الدكتوراه في التربية من كلية التربية في الجامعة اللبنانية، وشغلت مناصب مختلفة في مجال التعليم، معلمة ثانوية، مستشارة تربوية في وزارة التعليم، وأستاذة مساعدة في كلية التربية بالجامعة اللبنانية، وأيضا عملت مديرة الجمعية اللبنانية للعلوم التربوية بين عام 2015 و2019، ومن 2009 إلى 2014 شغلت منصب مدير أمانة تطوير قطاع التعليم في وزارة التربية والتعليم اللبنانية مع فريق من المتخصصين، وأيضا كانت مسؤولة عن مشاريع والبرامج بالتنسيق مع البنك الدولي للإنشاء والتعمير، وأيضا الاتحاد الأوروبي والوكالة الفرنسية للتنمية والوكالة الأمريكية للتنمية الدولية واليونيسيف. كما كانت مسؤولة عن تنفيذ مشاريع وضمان جودة تنفيذها. شغلت أيضا مدير مشروع التطوير التعليم ممول من قرض البنك الدولي، ولديها سيرة ذاتية عطرة. دكتورة ندى، جزاك الله خير، لك 15 دقيقة، نحاول إن شاء الله نجعلها في 10 دقائق بإذن الله تعالى. تفضل يا دكتورة.
شكرا. أولا أريد أن أشكر الجميع لإمكانية المشاركة في هذه الدراسة التي بدأناها. أوكي، علينا بس لأعمل شير سكرين. أعتذر بس شكله
ممكن تتحدثين دكتورة ندى وإحنا نحاول قدر الإمكان نسوي الشيرينج على أساس الوقت.
نعم، بس أفضل أنه تكون البرزنتيشن على السكرين إذا ممكن. في حد لحظة، خلاص شكراً.
ما ظهر شيء يا اختي. ممكن تكلمي لأن ما طلع شيء من عندنا هنا.
لحظة. طلع هلا؟
ممتاز، تفضلي.
اوكي. أود الإشارة بالبداية أنه هذه الدراسة أنجزت طبعاً قبل أزمة الكوفيد، ولكن لابد من التأكيد على أهمية هذه الدراسة اليوم، خاصة أنه دور المعلم أصبح أكثر أساسية، لأنه مطلوب منه إنجاز عدد كبير من الأمور، وخاصة أن يكون مبادر ولديه الابتكار. النقاط اللي حنتناولها اليوم هي التالية: الأهداف الدراسة، الإطار والمخرجات المنهجية، أبرز المضامين والمقترحات العامة لتطوير السياسات والتوصيات وفق المحاور. الطبع الدراسي بطلب من المركز العربي للتميز والجودة كان التركيز على الهدف الأساسي، وهو طبعاً تحقيق وجود معلمين مؤهلين لتلبية الSDG 4. الإطار والمخرجات بهالدراسة هي ل8 دول عربية: الأردن، البحرين، تونس، لبنان، المملكة العربية السعودية، عمان، مصر والمغرب. وضعنا تقرير مفصل أيضاً عن التوجهات العالمية الرائدة بهالمجال، ووضعنا تقرير يلخص هذه النتائج من الدول العربية المشاركة في الدراسة وبناء للتوجيهات العالمية. المنهجية اللي اتبعت هي التالية: أولاً، تم تحديد المحاور الأساسية للسياسات الخاصة بالمعلمين، وانطلاقاً من هذه المحاور الأساسية اللي بنيت على الوثائق الموجودة في اليونسكو، في أيضاً الدول الرائدة، وفي الدراسات العالمية، تم من خلال مراجعة الأدبيات وضع مصفوفة السياسات وفق المحاور. تم جمع وثائق رسمية الخاصة بسياسات المعلمين في جميع الدول المشاركة، يعني ب8 دول عربية التي شاركت، وهذه المصفوفة أرسلت للخبراء الوطنيين، لأنه كان في خبير بكل دولة، ووضع كل القوانين والمراسيم والقرارات الخاصة بها المحاور. أيضاً أجريت مقابلات مع عينة من المعنيين بسياسات المعلمين، وأرسلنا للخبراء الوطنيين لائحة للفئات ولأعداد المعنيين بالمقابلات وأسئلة المقابلات. واللائحة تضمنت ستيكهولدر، المسؤولين من وزراء، مدراء عامين، مسؤولين تفتيش، مدراء ومعلمين. بالنهاية كان في صياغة لتقرير وطني لكل من الدول المشاركة، ل8 دول مشاركة، وبعد إرسال من قبلنا إطار تفصيلي للتقرير الوطني لهذه الدول. بالحقيقة أبرز التوجهات العالمية اللي موجودة في كل المراجع هي: أول نقطة، جعل مهنة التعليم مهنة جذابة تستقطب أفضل كفاءات. ثاني نقطة هي تحديد واضح للأطر المرجعية لعمل المعلمين. الثالثة تأمين امتلاك معلمين الكفايات المناسبة للتعليم الفعال، تأمين توزيع مناسب للمعلمين على المناطق التربوية، تأمين ظروف ملائمة لفعالية العملية التعلمية والتعليمية، وتأمين التأطير والمتابعة والدعم المناسب للمعلم. بخلاصة التقارير الوطنية فيني أقول هون نقطة مهمة. التقارير الوطنية شملت 8 دول، ما فيني عمم هذه النتائج على جميع الدول العربية، وعم بحكي هون عن نتائج هذه الدول. أول نقطة هي إعادة نظر ببرامج إعداد المعلمين، ولا سيما تعزيز التربية العملية أو التطبيقية. أيضاً هناك مشكل بيعاني منه غالبية الدول المشاركة، هي توزيع المعلمين على المدارس وفق الحاجات الفعلية. ثالث نقطة هي اللجوء إلى معلمين متعاقدين عادة ما بيحملوا المؤهلات اللازمة للتعليم، كما في مشكل بعدم وجود استراتيجية واضحة متكاملة ومستدامة للتطوير المهني للمعلمين أثناء الخدمة، مبنية على معايير مهنية واستخدام هذه المعايير في المسار الوظيفي للمعلم طوال سنين خدمته. انطلاقاً من التقارير الوطنية منشوف أن هناك حاجة إلى رؤية استراتيجية، طبعاً هناك حاجة إلى تطوير الثقافة السائدة في المجتمع تجاه مهنة التعليم من خلال اعتماد سياسات مناسبة، وأيضاً مشاركة المعلمين بأهمية مشاركتهم بالتطوير التربوي وإعطائهم حرية للتخطيط في إطار تمهين حقيقي للتعليم. وأخيراً طبعاً تخصيص الموارد المالية لتطوير السياسات وتطبيقها على أرض الواقع لتطوير البيئة التعلمية والتعليمية. حققت أكثر وقت للتوصيات، والتوصيات مبنية على المحاور الأساسية لسياسات المعلمين. التوصية الأولى: غالبية الدول المشاركة في الدراسة تعاني من نقص في جاذبية مهنة التعليم، وبعتقد هاي مشكلة موجودة بغالبية دولنا. يعني اعتماد تدابير لجلب الطلاب المتميزين من التعليم الثانوي لرعايتهم وتقديم تسهيلات لهم لإعدادهم لمهنة التعليم. فالدول المتميزة إجمالاً فنلندا وسنغافورة مثلاً عندها مسألة سياسات أساسية فيها لجذب الكفاءات العالية من التعليم الثانوي كأبرز عنصر من عناصر تطوير النظام التربوي. النقطة الثانية: الأطر المرجعية. غالبية الدول المشاركة في الدراسة عندها أطر مرجعية واضحة لكفايات ومعايير المعلمين، ولكنها ليست بالضرورة مطبقة ومعتمدة في الإعداد والتدريب والمتابعة والتقييم. اللي بنقصنا هون هو اعتماد خطط لربط الإعداد لمهنة التعليم والإشراف على عمل المعلم والتنمية المهنية أثناء الخدمة والترقية في الوظيفة بمضامين الأطر المرجعية لتمهين التعليم. جودة برامج الإعداد. غالبية الدول المشاركة في برامج الإعداد تشكو من نقص المقررات العملية والتطبيقية، كما تشكو من نقص التنسيق بين الإعداد الأساسي والتدريب أثناء الخدمة والمتابعة.
دقيقتين الله يسلمك، دقيقتين
صعب أنهيهم، لكن حأحكي بسرعة عن التوصيات الأخرى. التوصية الأساسية هون هي التنسيق بين المؤسسات الجامعية ومؤسسات التدريب أثناء الخدمة. التوصية الرابعة: تقييم الإداء بهدف التنمية المهنية. نحن عنا مشكل أنه ما في ارتباط لتقييم الإعداد بالإعداد الأساسي للمعلمين، وما عنا منظومة متكاملة لتقييم إداء المعلم والمساءلة والتحفيز. الهدف من التقييم يجب أن يكون التحديث وتطوير المهارات. الرخص المهنية، عدد قليل من الدول العربية تبنت أو اعتمدت الرخص المهنية، ولكن بعدها لا منى بمصاف مزاولة مهن أخرى مثل الأطباء أو المهندسين أو المحامين، واعتماد هالترخيص لازم يكون دوري ومستمر ويمكن ربطه بمنظومة التقييم والترقي المهني. توزيع المعلمين على المدارس، غالبية هذه الدول، عدد كبير من هذه الدول لديها فائض معلمين في مناطق ولديها نقص في المعلمين بمناطق أخرى، لأن المناقلات ما بتتم دائما على أساس السياسات ويدخل فيها العديد من الشوائب. الأمن الوظيفي، المشكلة أن بعض الدول العربية بتلجأ إلى اعتماد معلمين متعاقدين، وبأغلب الأحيان ما بيكون لديهم المؤهلات اللازمة، وهذا عنده أثر كبير، خاصة أنه هالمعلمين بيروحوا على مناطق عادة هي التي تعاني من مشاكل تربوية أساسية. حقوق المعلمين، في اختلاف كبير بين دولة وأخرى حول الحقوق. في دول يجب أن تطور جانب له علاقة بحرية المعلم. المعلمين بالنسبة للمساءلة واجباتهم، كمان ليس هناك مدونات أخلاقية شاملة ببعض الدول، وهناك ضرورة للشفافية والعدالة في هذه المسألة. الضمانات الاجتماعية ورواتب المعلمين، أيضاا هناك ضرورة لتطويرها في بعض الدول، وخاصة بالنسبة للرواتب، وأن تصبح هذه الرواتب بنفس مستوى أي مهنة أخرى بنفس عنده مؤهلات دراسية واحدة. شكراً، حاولت أختصر قد ما فيني.
شكرا لك دكتورة ندى على حقيقة العرض المميز، ويعطيكم العافية. وجاتنا مجموعة من الأسئلة، ونريد أيضا أسئلة تكون الإجابات مختصرة. في سؤال موجه للدكتورة دكمارة، أنت ذكرتي في موضوع الاستراتيجية، لماذا وماذا وكيف يمكن تطبيقها من خلال نموذج تطبيقي للمعلمين؟ يمكن أكثر الشاتنج والأسئلة يركزون كيف نطبق هذه التوصيات. دكتورة دكمارة، كيف نطبق لماذا وماذا وكيف من خلال نموذج تطبيقي للمعلمين بشكل سريع لو تكرمتي؟
Yes, I'm not sure I understood the question because the translation is not very clear. Can you hear me?
Yes. You mentioned there are why and what and how can we implement this model for the teachers. This is why actually the question in English. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, now it's clearer. Thank you. So very quickly, I think this is the core of what we'll discuss during these 2 days, because also tomorrow there will be dedicated workshops. There is no clear-cut answer, but each country should think of what roles teachers need to address, to embrace, and how to then include these roles in teacher policies. In the Arab countries, as we know, teachers, they don't have so much a role, for instance, in curriculum development, but this can change. And teachers can have a more proactive role in mastering the curriculum requirements. And also the COVID-19 crisis showed that there is a need for teachers to be more autonomous and to have, as also Dr. Nada mentioned, they need more freedom, not necessarily they don't have the freedom, but they have to be encouraged to feel this autonomy and to be more proactive. Thank you.
دكتورة ندى، في سؤال ذكر، وحاول أدمج بعض الأسئلة عشان اختصار الوقت. يذكرون وش الدول اللي طبقت فيها الدراسة وكيف نعزز الجاذبية. يمكن معالي الأستاذ حسين الحمادي ذكر كيف نعزز الجاذبية المهنية أو الجاذبية لمهنة التعليم.
نعم.
ومتى تتوقع تكون على أرض الواقع دكتورة ندى؟
نعم، شكرا. بعتقد الموضوع الجاذبية لمهنة المعلمين عنده شقين، شق أكاديمي وشق آخر مجتمعي. الشق الأكاديمي هو لما منشجع التلامذة التعليم الثانوي المتميزين للدخول إلى مهنة التعليم من خلال إغراءات. الإغراء الأساسي هو ممكن يكون مالي، ولكن الإغراء الثاني هو فتح المسارات أمام المعلم. يعني لما بيطور حاله بحق له يصير منسق، مشرف، مدير عام إلى آخره وفق تطور مهني. لكن أيضاً الموضوع المجتمعي، المعلم في سابق يعني من 30-40 سنة كان عنده قبول اجتماعي وتقدير. اليوم لا، وهيدا اللي لازم ينشغل عليه إن كان مجتمعياً أو أكاديمياً.
ممتاز. دكتورة دكمارة، ذكرتي في مبادرات اليونسكو العالمية والإقليمية لسياسات المعلمين، وذكرتي دليل سياسات المعلمين المعد من الفريق الدولي للمعلمين TTF. السؤال اللي يطرح كيف يتم تطبيق هذا الدليل على مستوى المدرسة؟ كيف نعزز موضوع جاذبية المهنة وأيضا التطبيق المتميز لسياسات المعلمين داخل المصنع التربوي أو داخل الصف الدراسي؟ كيف تنتقل السياسات إلى تطبيق داخل المصنع التربوي أو الفصل الدراسي؟ دكتورة دكمارة لو تكرمتي.
Yes, also thanks for this question, very important question. Very quick answer for now, but we will talk more with our colleagues also tomorrow. Basically, the World Teacher Day this year was conducted under the topic teacher leadership. So we said in brief that teachers need good leaders, proactive leaders and forward-thinking leaders, but they themselves, they are leaders in different ways and at different levels. So my dream is that the ministries, education authorities at different levels, they come up with forward-thinking policies, but teachers at school level, they are also proactive in the way they promote change. And this, what we call top-down and bottom-up, that should come together. And in many places, it's happening also in the Arab region, which is fabulous. And we just need to make this process more visible, which I hope will happen now in this workshop.
في سؤال thank you. في سؤال مشترك، كيف نغير دور المعلم في ظل التغير الحاصل في جائحة كورونا من خلال السياسات؟ هذا موجه للدكتورة ندى والدكتورة دكمارة. كيف نغير دور المعلم ليستجيب للتغير في السياسات الخاصة للمعلمين في ظل جائحة كورونا؟
إذا ممكن، بعتقد المعلم المتمكن اللي عنده قدرة على التأقلم والابتكار بيقدر يكون ناجح من خلال التعليم عن بعد. ولكن هاي ممكن نغيرها بكبسة زر. هاي بدنا نشتغل على التنمية المهنية وتنمية روح الابتكار والتأقلم. أنا عندي نقطة واحدة حابة أضيفها. تفاصيل الدراسة موجودة على الويب سايت تاع المركز واللي حطيته ببداية البرزنتيشن، والدول محطوطة أسمائهم اللي هن الدول قلتهم بعتقد.
وهذه ستنشر إن شاء الله جميع بعد انتهاء إن شاء الله الندوة هذه، ستنشر كافة أوراق العمل للاطلاع عليها بالتفصيل. دكتورة دكمارة، عندك تعليق في هذا الموضوع؟
Yes, very quickly, two things. This crisis and the studies that have been carried out by UNESCO and also other partners, World Bank and UNICEF, they showed that what students miss the most is the direct contact with their teachers and with their learners. So they can learn through distance learning to online learning, but the direct contact is missing. And this is the role of teachers, to keep the community of learners together and to motivate teachers and to counsel students and to counsel them. And secondly is this interactive modality of teaching and learning, because sitting in front of a screen and lecturing is not necessarily the best way to do. You can be interactive also through online modalities or through television, through radio. And I think this is what we need to focus on.
في سؤال دكتورة ندى، كيف نوحد جهود الدول العربية فيما يتعلق بالسياسات الخاصة بالمعلمين؟ كيف يتم توحيد الجهود للاستفادة من تحقيق الجودة وتحقيق غايات الهدف الرابع من أهداف التنمية المستدامة؟ دكتورة ندى بشكل سريع.
بعتقد اللقاء اليوم هو واحد من أشكال توحيد الجهود، وعلينا الاستمرار بوضع دراسات ومشاركتها ونقاشها. طبعا هناك دول في اختلاف بين الدول حسب حاجاتها، ولكن المشاركة ووضع دراسات تسمح لنا بتوحيد هذه الجهود.
أبختم بسؤال ورد لي وسؤال مشترك، ببدأ بالدكتورة دكمارة. دائما يقولون أنتم في التعليم منظرون، لكن أين التطبيق؟ فكيف نعمل ردم هذه الهوة بين النظرية والتطبيق حتى نحقق الجودة المنشودة والمستدامة؟ دكتورة دكمارة.
Yeah, this is our curse in education. This is our main challenge, because we are sometimes very good in theory and in policies and in academic kind of discourses, but then implementation is the challenge. But there are ways to do it. And what we want also in this workshop is to see what are the bottlenecks. I work now very closely with the Arab region for more than 8 years, and I worked also before coming to Beirut. And I always hear from my colleagues in different countries, we are very good in theory, in policies, but not in practice. Well, we have to see why is this happening? What is preventing us from implementing? And I hope this discussion will be helping us today and tomorrow to look more into the bottlenecks and the avenues for action. Thank you.
دكتورة ندى، عندك تعليق نختم فيه؟
نعم، بعتقد العمل الأساسي لازم يتم من خلال المدرسة وفريق المدرسة. أنا بعتقد والدراسات أثبتت أنه أي تطوير مهني بده يكون انطلاقاً من المدرسة، فالعمل مع فريق المدرسة هو اللي يخلينا نطور.
إذن هي المدرسة والمصنع التربوي. ساعتنا وفق توقيت المملكة العربية السعودية 12:20، توقيت الإمارات العربية المتحدة 21:21. شكرا لكم وشكرا لالتزامكم بالجودة والوقت والقيمة العلمية لأوراق العمل التي تنشر. شكرا للجميع والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
حاليا سوف يكون هناك استراحة لمدة 5 دقائق. إذا رقب الحضور أو ممكن نستمر مباشرة في استكمال الحوار.
ناخذ 5 دقائق لحد ما يدخل اندرياس، لأنه حتى الآن ما دخل أستاذ مهرة.
ناخذ 2 دقائق بريك لحد ما يدخل السيد اندرياس.
Yes, Andreas, you are in. Thank you very much. Hi, Andreas. The voice is...
Hi, Mr. Andreas. Hi, Mr. Andreas.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. الأخوة الأفاضل المشاركين في حوار السياسات، نستكمل الحوار بالجلسة الثانية والتي سوف يشاركنا فيها الدكتور أندرياس شلايشر، اسم معروف ومرموق على المستوى العالمي في مجال التعليم، فهو مدير المهارات مديرية المهارات والتعليم في منظمة التعاون والاقتصاد والتنمية. بادر بالإشراف على برنامج التقييم الدولي البيزا، وأيضاً المسح الذي تجريه منظمة المهارات لمهارات الكبار، كما أنه والأجهزة والبرامج التقييم الأخرى، والتي أنشأت منصة عالمية لصانعي السياسات والباحثين والمعلمين عبر الدول والثقافات لابتكار وتحويل السياسات والممارسات التعليمية. عمل لأكثر من 20 عاماً مع الوزراء وقادة التعليم لتحسين التعليم، حصل على العديد من الجوائز والأوسمة بما في ذلك جائزة تيودور هيوس، والتي تمنح باسم أول رئيس لجمهورية ألمانيا الاتحادية عن المشاركة الديمقراطية المثالية، وهو حاصل على درجة الأستاذية الفخرية في جامعة هايدلبرغ. سوف يستعرض دكتور أندرياس من خلال ورقته نتائج المسح الدولي للتدريس والتعلم تالس، والخاص بالمعلمين وسياسات المعلمين، والذي شاركت فيه دولتين على مستوى الوطن العربي هما دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة والمملكة العربية السعودية. Mr. Andreas, you can start.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for allowing me to share some thoughts on this important issue of securing teacher professionalism in very difficult times for education and in very uncertain times for education. You had, in the height of the crisis, 1.5 billion young people being locked out of their schools, and understanding that learning is not a place but an activity. Remote learning sort of became the lifeline for success in education, but we've also learned that technology doesn't replace the many social functions of schools. At the end of the day, learning is never a transactional phenomenon. It's always a relational phenomenon. And the one thing that students are going to remember from these times in 10 years, from now, is the teacher who reached out to them, the teacher who understood their dreams, their passions, their difficulties, and so supported them as individuals. That's so important, the kind of relational social function of schooling. We've also seen that technology has tended, and of course, teachers themselves face this steep learning curve. Just-in-time professional development became the kind of keyword of the day. You couldn't have possibly been prepared as a teacher for a pandemic like this, but in that moment, you had to be ready for it. That is the new normal for the times in which we live. And we've also seen that many teachers, many educators have been extremely innovative. And this has been not just about technological innovation, it's also been about social innovation. Very, very important. The one thing I wanted to share with you, and I think this is a very encouraging finding from a study, is not yet TALIS, but a study that we carried out in May this year, is that this crisis has brought people together. In a way, you can say that the last 10, 15 years have been a trend towards a commodification of education. Often students became consumers, teachers became service providers, parents became clients. And it's created a distance between the players that make education work. I think what this pandemic has done is the opposite. It's brought people together. Parents at home suddenly figured out, the work that teachers do every day. What does it actually mean to teach? What does it mean to learn? How can I support it? Teachers have understood, you cannot just broadcast knowledge anymore. You need to actually understand how different students learn differently and embrace that diversity with differentiated kind of strategies and policies. Basically, education has become, again, a whole of society enterprise. And you can see when we surveyed stakeholders, in most countries, actually, the work was done between government and schools together. It's not about governments, it's not about schools, it's actually governments with schools, who were the main actor in the pandemic. And what I also found really encouraging is that about 8 out of 10 people said, everybody did all they could to help. It doesn't mean that things have gone perfectly, but it means that there was a clear commitment to make things work by everybody. Also, most people would have said things were quite well planned, things were quite well executed. There were actually relatively few conflicts with teachers and few conflicts with parents. There was good collaboration between public and private sectors. All things that in normal times we have so many difficulties with. Suddenly in this pandemic, people were willing to go the extra mile. So I think this is something that I hope we will take away from this crisis. But, let's get to the reality. The crisis has exposed and amplified many inequalities in our school systems. And we estimate that the long-term economic shadows, the learning losses that have occurred will be huge. In some countries, you talk about trillions and trillions of dollars that are going to be lost because less well-educated young people will become less productive workers and things like this. Very, very large sums of money being lost because education didn't deliver for a substantial period of time. What this means is that it won't be enough to get back to the status quo when things get back to normal. The idea needs to be to become a lot better in education. If we want to give the young people who have been affected a chance to catch up. When you ask what countries are trying to achieve in the pandemic, of course, the focus on academic success is the #1 priority, and that's no surprise. That's what will make students successful in their lives. But you can also see professional support and advice for teachers is very high on the agenda now. It used to be often an afterthought. Now it's one of the core priorities. Ensuring the social development of students, very high. The well-being of students, the well-being of teachers. All those things, are being discussed in normal times. But suddenly in the pandemic, they have risen to the forefront, very close to the core purpose of schooling, the academic success of students. That's basically what countries are trying to achieve. And then, innovation has been a big player in this. We have seen an enormous use of online instructional resources in 9 out of 10 systems. So those have been the means of the day. But look at the orange bar. This is not about, some magic technology platform delivering magic learning solutions, but actually most of the online learning was actually delivered by the same teachers of the students. So technology was the mediator, but not the source of learning. So technology has amplified, accelerated good teaching, but it hasn't replaced poor teaching. That's basically a very important lesson from the pandemic, that actually technology changes the role of teachers. The direct instruction becomes perhaps less important, but you as a teacher being a good coach, being a good mentor, being a good facilitator, being a good evaluator, that certainly has become much, much more important. We have also seen other resources, television, radio, that in normal times, don't play a big role in education, rising to the forefront. So a broad mix of kind of instructional resources being used in education. Now, technology is always only going to be as good as it's actually being deployed. And now I'm going to get to TALIS. What you can see here is that it's just about half of the teachers on average across the countries for which we have data who typically let students use technology for projects or classwork. It is better in countries like Denmark, New Zealand, Australia, or the United Arab Emirates. There you can see teachers are quite comfortable with using technology. They do that often. But you go to the other end of the spectrum, a high-tech country like Japan. When you think about Japan, you think about, advanced technology, robots, cameras, everything. But you go to classrooms and teachers are not, comfortable with using technology. That also shows us there's no automaticity that technology will create, a workforce that's using technology more intensively. So you can see big variation across countries. And on average, lots of students being left out of this. But the good news is that things are changing. You know, when I compare data between 2013 and 2018, you can see a number of countries that have almost, you know, or more than doubled the share of teachers who frequently let students use technology. So some countries are progressing very rapidly, but a lot more needs to be done. Teacher preparation, teacher use is absolutely central. As you would expect, you know, younger teachers are better prepared in the use of technology. Now, that's no surprise. When you look at the kind of orange dot here, these are teachers who completed their training in the last 5 years. And so you can see the dots are generally much higher than the blue bars, which is good. But again, you know, that's not the reality in classroom. The reality in a classroom is all teachers. It's not just the young teachers. So it's not just enough to wait, you know, for new teachers coming into your system. It's also a matter of how you upgrade the technological competences of teachers within your systems. So it's not just about pre-service training. It's more important about the in-service training that is involved. Now, some people are very skeptical about, you know, initial education. They say, well, you know, people go to universities and when they get to schools, they adopt all the bad practices that are dominant in the school. Well, actually, our data show that the likelihood of teachers to frequently use technology is actually quite strongly related to technology being included in formal teacher education. So by making this part of teacher pathways, you are more likely to see technology being used in the classroom. Well, you know, there could be some reverse causality in this. You know, it could be that teachers who are very technology savvy, they also choose programs that are more emphasis, give more emphasis to this. Could be. But I think in general, the association suggests that, you know, initial teacher education may make a difference. In some countries more, in some countries less. Now, you can see that here varies. So how do teachers themselves learn? That was one of the big questions for us. And you can see here in systems like Korea or Shanghai in China, the green dot is very high to the top of the screen. Now, basically, every teacher regularly learns through online courses, online seminars. So technology is very common for teacher education. But in most countries, the green dots are well below the red triangle. So most countries, teachers themselves do not use a lot of technology for their own learning. That's something to look at. You know, we expect students to learn from and with technology. There's probably a lot more we can do to help teachers learn from and with technology. And some countries clearly are doing much better than others. If you know, I mentioned already, you know, Korea and Shanghai, but you also have Australia that is doing quite well on this, or the Russian Federation, Chinese Taipei, England, and Mexico. So again, there's a lot that we can probably learn from each other to think why some countries are more advanced than others to get their teachers up front. And of course, in a situation like the pandemic, when universities are often closed, that's the only means of teacher learning. So very, very important part. Now, getting to the reopening of schools. Of course, you know, it's much easier to close schools than to open them. We have seen that the hard way in this. And the first thing probably people assess more realistically now is that school closures have perhaps not contributed as much to containing the spread of the virus as people had initially thought. And initially, schools were seen as a kind of super spreaders, and therefore, you know, they were immediately closed. Now we know they're basically, they are modest. Their contribution to the spread of the virus is actually quite modest. So that's also why most countries are now reopening their schools, even if the pandemic is very strong, and try to reconcile the health of students and teachers with the learning needs of students. We're seeing actually very few additional school closures at this point. And there's a lot of efforts being placed in schools on, you know, training students, training teachers, training staff on hygiene, applying social distancing that imposes capacity constraints on schools, but also imposes limitations on pedagogy. When students have to, you know, sit far apart from each other, you know, how do you do interactive pedagogy? How do you do, you know, project-based learning? I think those are questions very, very real. Many countries have, you know, made the use of masks mandatory, at least for teachers, often also for schools. Things like this, the common closure of school areas. It's a lot of initiative being underway to reconcile safety with learning. But the big question I already highlighted is, can we reconcile social distancing with the kind of innovative pedagogy that will drive success in the future? Now, when we surveyed countries in May, what is interesting, only 22% of the education systems wanted to go back to where they come from, return to normal scheduling and instruction. Look at the yellow bar. Over half of the education systems see hybrid learning as the new normal. So integrating the world of technology with the world of the school is the new normal. And that is not just, adding technology to what is done in school or conserving existing practice with technology. No, it's about transforming existing practice with technology. It means teachers understand how different students learn differently and embrace that diversity with quite differentiated pedagogical practice. And they may apply a different combination of technology and in-presence learning for different types of students. Younger students require more contact with the teachers. Students from disadvantaged neighborhoods require more contact with teachers. So as a teacher, you need to know a lot more about your students. And that's where, big data, system learning analytics, classroom analytics can actually help teachers to become more knowledgeable about how different students learn differently. Now, that's the aspiration, the ambition. The extent to which this becomes a reality is, of course, a big question. And as a kind of reality check, I want to show you some data from Thales about the prevalence of pedagogical strategies. What you can see here is that teachers are quite comfortable with, traditional instruction. Now you can see 90% of teachers say, I explain to students what I expect them to learn. And then, 85, I explain how new and old topics are related. I set goals at the beginning of the instruction and so on. And that's what teachers usually do and are feeling comfortable with. But when you get to cognitive activation, that is so central to 21st century success in school systems, you can see less than 60% of teachers say, I give tasks that require students to think critically. Just half say, I have students work in small groups to come up with a solution. Less than half say, I let students solve complex tasks. And just, a third say, I present tasks for which there is no obvious solution. And less than 30% say, I give students projects that require at least a week to complete. And that is precisely the kind of learning that the 21st century is about, and that learning in the pandemic has been about. Students, who had been able to set their own learning goals, to monitor their own learning process, who had, acquired effective strategies for learning. For them, remote learning has been liberating and exciting. But students who used to be spoon-fed by their teachers, learning little chunks of knowledge and not being motivated, not being inspired, they were left very badly behind when technology became the only option. So you can see the aspiration of education systems to advance and the reality of current pedagogical strategies. There's a big gap between the two. Let me highlight one aspect that is related to this, and that is really ownership and empowerment. To what extent do teachers become effective designers of innovative learning environments, rather than just the implementers of, prefabricated, tools and strategies? One of the things that we learn at the OECD is that where you do not engage the profession in the design of public policy, they're not going to help you implementing innovative public policy. And when we look at this, you can see that virtually every teacher has a fair degree of control over what they do in the classroom. They can choose their teaching methods, assess student learning, deal with discipline, deal with homework, all sorts of things that are related to their direct work in the classroom. Is a lot of autonomy. Maybe some would say too much. A lot of this is, not embedded in deep professional practice. But when you think about, only half of schools, a little bit more than half, do teachers play a role in school management according to principles. So this idea of shared leadership, teachers being part of the design of the instructional policies and so on, that is actually still quite rare in education system. So that balance, I think, is something to review. Now, also professional autonomy doesn't mean, you know, I can do what I like to do, but professional autonomy means I do what I know is right in the name of my profession. So it means that teachers regularly look outwards. There is not only professional autonomy, but there's also a strong collaborative culture. I think education can learn a lot from other sectors in our society. Science, technology are very, very good at that. If you're a software engineer, you know, you share all of your solutions on GitHub. You know, that's a technology platform where you find everything that others are doing. You download other people's ideas, you contribute, you criticize their ideas. This is sort of very normal for people, a shared profession. But in teaching, you see what you see on the screen here, a lot of isolation in the classroom, a lot of responsibility at the front line, but very little engagement in shaping their profession. Something to work on. Now, some people say, well, you know, there's not much innovation in education. It's because teachers are big barriers to innovation. That's not what we found in TELUS, actually. No, actually, 4 out of 5 teachers say that they strive to develop new ideas for teaching. So it seems there is, at least on paper, a strong commitment among teachers to become more innovative. And you can see in most countries, the bars are actually quite low. You know, you can see in most countries, you have teachers, it's a high percentage of secondary teachers who agree or strongly agree with, you know, most of the teachers are open to change. So this is not just me, but that's also my colleagues are open to change. And most teachers in the school search for new ways to solve problems. Isn't that interesting? So there is a lot of potential. It's better in, you know, countries like Georgia, Vietnam, system of Shanghai, a little bit less so in Belgium or Portugal. But again, you know, you can see overall, it's the majority of teachers. So why don't we see innovation when teachers themselves consider them to be innovative? That's a big question to ask, and that's a systems question. When we design policies, why are we not using the innovative capacity of the people who work at the front line? Something not going well. We also see part of the answer is on the part of principals. No? You can see only about 60% of the principals say they take actions to support cooperation among teachers to develop new teaching practices. Now, that's about the collaborative culture that needs a lot of support, it needs a lot of enablers. And you can see, yeah, it's a slight majority of principals, but you would want to see that bar to be 100%. So I think part of the issue in lack of innovation relates to the leadership dimension. Part of it also relates to mentoring. Professional collaboration has a lot to do with how teachers actually work together. And you can see the percentage of teachers who have an assigned mentor as part of a formal arrangement at the school is actually, particularly for novice teachers, not very, very good. In some systems, that's very, very good. You know, you can see here the top performer is Shanghai in China, but also New Zealand, Singapore, Kazakhstan, and so on. There, things are normal. Now, when you come into a school, you get a mentor, and they're going to work with you to help you grow into your profession. But in many countries, actually, that's just a tiny minority of teachers who do have such mentoring arrangements. And this is something you wouldn't want only to see for novice teachers. It's something that should be a practice for every teacher. Every teacher being a mentor and every teacher having a mentor. And actually, in some countries, I want to highlight here the United Arab Emirates. That's actually very strong on this. That's not just, you know, about novice teachers, but has become, at least for 40% of the teachers, it's some general practice. That's something that is, you know, doesn't cost you money. It's something, it's a matter of creating a culture where actually teachers are not just, you know, instructing students, but where everybody learns. Students learn, teachers learn, schools learn. So I mentioned already, you know, the importance of teacher professional collaboration. Let's look at this in a little bit more detail. How do teachers actually collaborate with their peers? You can see 61% of teachers regularly discuss the development of students with colleagues, and 47 frequently exchange teaching materials. Now that looks good. That's, I think, something that you would want to see. But on the right side, when you look at the more deeper level of professional collaboration, only 28% teach classes as a team at least once a month. Only 9% routinely observe colleagues and give feedback. That's how you learn as a teacher. Looking at how other people do things differently and discussing and learning with them, helping them improve and improve yourselves. So there's a lot of superficial collaboration happening, but the kind of deeper collaboration that really makes a difference is still very, very rare. And what you can see actually here is that it varies again across countries. If you go to Austria or Italy or Japan, there is actually a lot of team teaching in the classrooms. But in Croatia, it's very, very rare. If you go to here, Vietnam, you can see there is a lot of classroom observation and teachers regularly provide feedback. Also to some extent in Kazakhstan, to some extent in Shanghai, but in many countries it's not. Participate in professional collaborative learning. Again, some education systems do that really well, but many do not. So this is a matter of how do we reconfigure the people, the spaces, the time and the technology to actually use teachers more productively. And professional collaboration really is the anchor point of that. A lot of room for improvement in most education systems that we can do. What we also see is that, this is not just in the abstract. Our data from TALIS show that there's a strong correlation between the adoption of innovative teaching practices and professional collaboration. Where teachers work more together, you can see them being more ready to adopt a new teaching practice. And that's not a surprise. If you adopt a new teaching practice, you take a big risk as a teacher. You may embarrass yourself in front of your students, in front of your teachers. So the more you are connected to your neighboring teachers, to your neighboring school, the more you feel empowerment and safety and security in adopting new practices. So it's not a surprise what you can see on the data, but I think it's something that we should take away and so on. But
Mr. Andreas, you have 5 minutes.
I will finish in 5 minutes. I'm almost at the end. What you can see are principles, leadership activities. You think that, teachers don't collaborate very well, but look at principals. The percentage of lower secondary principals who often or very often engage in collaborating with principals from other schools in the last 12 months prior to the survey, just about 40%. In some countries, like Romania, South Africa, Korea, or Turkey, that looks a little bit better, but you have others where teachers, school leaders never or almost never look upwards to their neighboring schools. So it's not just at the level of within the school, it's also strengthening collaboration across school. That's where system policies, the kind of things that you as leaders deal with, are so important. Where do teachers feel stress from? Teaching actually, increasing teaching hours doesn't relate a lot to the stress that teachers perceive. That's an interesting finding because many people say, well, teachers teach too many hours, so you should be worried about this. We don't see a strong relationship between teaching hours and stress. But, individual planning or preparation is a source of stress that is more important. And that's, again, when teachers feel left alone, they have a lot of pressures, they don't struggle with this. Marking, correcting student work. Now, hopefully technology is going to take that over, but then administrative work. Engaging teachers to solve bureaucratic problems that have nothing to do with their principal cause, namely working with students. That is the big driver of teacher anxiety, teacher stress. So that's something to work on. Now, how can we sort of enable teachers to become professional leaders without bogging them down in administrative structures? And this is going to be my concluding part. The last point is a call for all of us to improve the appreciation and status of teachers in our society. What our data show really here is that in many countries, teachers are not perceived, or teachers themselves do not see that their work is valued in society. There's some education systems where this is very good, like Vietnam, Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, or Korea, but also some education systems where this is very poor. The country where I live in, France, it's about 5-6% of teachers who feel that society values the work that they do every day. In some countries that has improved, like in Canada, like in Shanghai, like in Estonia, but in other countries, it's got actually worse. The status of the teaching profession has declined, like in New Zealand, like in Belgium, like in Chile. So this is something I think we all can do, is to value the work of our teachers. And maybe that's the one thing that the pandemic has done for education. And with that, I want to conclude and look forward to the discussion and your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Andreas, for this interesting presentation. Before I take the question from the audience, I want to just leave the floor for His Excellence or the speaker if they have some question for Mr. Andreas. I think everything is clear, Mr. Andreas, but I take some question from the audience for 5 questions. I will ask it in Arabic if you have the translation.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, السؤال الأول كيف يحرص النظام التعليمي على وجود التكنولوجيا لتعميق التعلم وليس كوسيلة كمالية لعرض المعلومات والمعارف. It's asked about how the education system include the technology and embed the technology in education as a core of the education, not as the daily uses.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question. In fact, we must be honest on this. Technology has not always played a very productive role in education. We see, for example, in our PISA studies that technology intensity is not generally related to better learning outcomes. And the question really is, how can we use technology not just to conserve existing practice, but to transform them? And I would say a big part of the answer is to engage teachers themselves in the design of those technological solutions. Not every teacher, but actually to allow the teaching force, the users, actually to become part of the development of those solutions. I think that's your best bet to actually get them into a space where they actually are voluntarily and readily adopt those solutions. I have seen that working very, very well in China, where basically every teacher is part of research groups and design groups where they actually work together. And you can see in the pandemic, they were very, very quick in using technology very creatively. Vietnam is also very, very good at this. Estonia is very good at that. So I think engaging this, the point is that this shouldn't be driven by technology companies who are very good at designing computer games. It should be driven by the profession, by pedagogy.
Thank you, Mr. Andreas. The second question is, I will ask you it in English, how to encourage the role of a teacher to make him the leader of learning process, like in this time of pandemic and all of that.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the one thing that the pandemic has really fostered. Teachers were less instructors because they couldn't, instruct in a very traditional way. And they become actually more leaders of learning activities. They had to be good coaches. Teachers had to, be very good at the subjects they teach. Obviously, that's never changing. They had to be very good at understanding how different students learn that subject differently. But they also had to have a lot of knowledge about their students. And I think that's the interesting part that actually has encouraged teachers to become good coaches, good mentors, good facilitators, good evaluators, and good designers of innovative learning process. Again, not every teacher. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of variability in this as well. Students and parents will tell you some teachers did an amazing job and some teachers did a very poor job in that. So there was a lot of variability in this. But again, I think we should cherish those teachers who are changing their role. And I think, beyond the pandemic, that's what technology is going to do. Like in many other jobs, technology is going to take over many of the routine tasks of teachers. Why should you listen to a teacher telling you about an experiment as a student when you can now do that experiment in a virtual laboratory? Now, I think those parts of the teaching processes will actually become very much dominated by technology. But that will not make the role of teachers less important. The role of teachers will become far more important in helping students, in guiding them. So I think what education systems should do is to encourage that transformation and that transition. It's not done through initial teacher education and training, but it's done through encouraging a collaborative work organization in schools, where actually teachers observe each other's practices, where they engage in collaborative professional learning, where they engage in classroom observation. So I think where school leaders facilitate that, where education systems provide the time and the space and resources for that, you're going to see that transition more successfully.
Thank you. The last question is, do you have any recommendation from the TALAS study to Arab country, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, that they can improve the teacher policies and teacher situation in the country, in the Arab and specifically in these two countries?
Yeah, I think the one thing, the easy step is actually to pay your teachers properly. If you want to attract people into the profession who are, great people, you have to think about what are the working conditions that you need to offer them. And actually, I don't mean to make teaching financially more attractive just. I think it's also a matter of making teaching intellectually more attractive. What you can see, for example, if I combine the TALIS results and the PISA results, a lot of the teaching in the Arab countries, including in Saudi Arabia, is still very much about focus on the reproduction of subject matter content. Students are very good in replicating knowledge they have learned. But as soon as you move into, being able to extrapolate from what apply your knowledge in novel settings, those kinds of tasks are very hard for students in these countries. And this is precisely where the future lies. If you want to make your students more creative, you have to give them, more room to experiment. If they experiment, they're going to take risks. If they take risks, they will make mistakes. If teachers are not very good in helping students learn from and with mistakes, your students are not going to become more creative. So I think this is one special feature where I think particularly the Arab world can improve a lot, sort of to create a work environment that is more stimulating for teachers, more interesting, where teachers have more room, more time, more opportunity to engage with their colleagues, to frame new practice, to be more innovative, to become effective designers of innovative practice. And that is still very, very limited. In some of the Arab countries, the situation is not helped by a highly fragmented school system. Now you have lots of kind of providers that all play their role, very little coordination among them. It's not so much an issue in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, it's still a quite, but there you have got a lot of local solutions. So I think establishing coherence, a systemic perspective, and good incentive structures, not just financial incentives, but actually also incentives around work organization, around innovation, about recognition. Often we are not very good in recognizing the entrepreneurs among the teachers, the innovators among teachers. We are not, many teachers feel schools still to be an innovation hostile environment, and to draw more value out of the good ideas of the many teachers. The future of education very much depends on the innovation and creativity at the front line. So I think anything you can do to enhance that, I think is going to strengthen your profession, and by that, strengthen the learning outcomes in your countries.
Thank you, Mr. Andreas. And with this question and this great answer, we will close this session. And بهذه الإجابة اللي تدعو أن النظم التعليمية يكون هناك فيها مجال أكبر للابتكار، للإبداع، ليكون المعلم أكثر ابتكارا وإبداعا وتقبلا لطلبته لكي يساعدهم أيضا ليصبحوا مبتكرين ومبدعين. سوف أترك الآن دفة السفينة للدكتور عبد السلام الجوفي مستشار مكتب التربية العربي لإدارة الجلسة الثالثة، فليتفضل مشكورا.
شكرا شكرا اندرياس، شكرا اصحاب المعالي والسعاده وكل الحاضرين جميعا. الحقيقه الان انا اشاهد معنا اكثر من 1000 شخص يشاهدون مباشره عبر المنصه المباشره، وهناك حوالي 500 شخص عبر القنوات اليوتيوب، وايضا اللي هو الخاصه بمكتب التربيه العربيه دول الخليج، والمركز الاقليمي للجوده والتميز، والمركز الاقليمي للتخطيط التربوي. شكرا الجميع. الان انتقل الى الجلسه الثالثه، والحقيقه في الجلسه الثالثه انا سعيد جدا في هذه الجلسه انه عندنا تنوع غير عادي، عندنا مشاركين من جميع يعني من مناطق مختلفه من العالم، عندنا من اسيا وعندنا من اوروبا وعندنا من امريكا، وايضا خبره هؤلاء ايضا متنوعه. جميعهم خدموا وعملوا يعني قدموا خدماتهم الجليلة مش فقط للمناطق التي يتواجدون فيها ولكن لمناطق مختلفة في العالم. وبالتالي أنا أتوقع بأن هذه الجلسة سوف تكون جلسة ثرية. سأبدأ يعني بتقديم الحقيقة. أنا أريد أن أتيح جزء من الوقت حتى يتمكن يعني أتأكد من جميع السادة المشاركين معنا قد تمكنوا من الدخول. عندنا السيدة كريمبلي ميل من الOECD، وعندنا أيضا السيدة ليو إي من المعهد الوطني للسنغافوري، وعندنا أيضا السيد فرناندو من هارفارد. أتمنى أن يكونوا جميعا قد وصلوا حتى نتمكن من تقديمهم والاستفادة من الوقت والاستفادة الكبرى مما سيقدموه من معلومات، وأيضا من تجربتهم وخبرتهم ومن إمكانياتهم الثرية والعظيمة. أتأكد موجودين معنا. كارين موجودة؟ Are you here, Karen? Hello, Karen. Are you with us?
Yes, I am. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good morning. Professor Law, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I think I think Fernando, he doesn't join us yet. He will join us soon. So I will introduce now the first speaker. المتحدث الأول في هذه الجلسة والذي سيأخذ 20 دقيقة للحديث هي السيدة كيمبري ميل، يعني وهي الحقيقة بخبرتها متنوعة مع الOECD، متنوعة من حيث الإمكانات ومن حيث القدرات ومن حيث أيضا مجالات العمل. هي الآن تعمل مسؤولة على يعني كبيرة محللي بيانات تالس التي تحدث عليها السيد اندرياس قبل قليل، وايضا في نفس الوقت هي نائبه لوحده الطفوله المبكره في الOECD، وعملت ايضا في اللي هو educational balance، وعملت ايضا في كثير من المجالات والتقارير التي تقوم بها الOECD، وهي متنوعه الحقيقه، متنوعه الخبرات ومتنوعه ايضا اماكن الخبرات. وانا سعيد جدا ايضا انها عملت ايضا في كثير من المجالات ومتخصصه ايضا في مجال التربيه المقارنه، وبالتالي هذا يعطيها ايضا بعد اخر. لو متحدثتنا هي ستحدثنا على اللي هو الاستجابات التي حدثت في يعني في موضوع التعليم واثناء كوفيد-19. وبالتالي انا لن يعني اذا استمرت الحديث على خبرتها الممتده يعني لعشرات السنين، لكن سوف أتركها وسوف تستمعون أيضا إلى ما ستحدثنا عنه حول التجارب المتميزة وأيضا حول خبرتها في هذا المجال واستجابات الدول في موضوع اللي هو التعليم بعد يعني في خلال جائحة كورونا كوفيد-19. Karen, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, I will just, so I will get started. So my goal today, in order to complement Andreas' presentation, is to give you some implications of TALIS 2018 findings for policy. And the context, of course, you know it, is that the quality of a school system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers and principals, and the quality of teachers themselves cannot exceed the quality of the education they received before starting, the opportunities to collaborate and to develop through their career, as well as the working conditions which they enjoy. So in terms of TALIS 2018, really the overarching focus was on teacher professionalism, and we look at it through the teacher career pathway, looking at the pre-service stage before they enter into teaching, and then in service stage. So first we look at attracting and selecting quality and high caliber candidates into the teacher education programs and the leadership preparation. Then we look at how do we develop them, equipping teaching professionals with adequate knowledge and skills through high quality pre-service preparation, but also enhancing their knowledge and skills through in-service professional development. We then look at which support mechanisms are accessible to them through induction, mentoring, and collaboration. And I know that Andreas presented you some presentations presentation around this. And then we look at an important issue, which is empowerment. And that's what Andreas concluded with. How do we make sure that teachers and school leaders have enough autonomy, opportunities for leadership and for career progression in order to really feel empowered? And the overarching goal is to fulfill them, to make the profession really fulfilling for them, and to retain them in the profession. And so that has to do with work conditions, well-being, as well as satisfactory job. The idea really is to build a virtuous cycle of improvement. So how did we tackle this in Talis? We have 5 pillars. We look at knowledge and skills, career opportunities, the collaborative culture, responsibility, autonomy, and prestige. The first volume of Talis focused more on knowledge and skills. And the second one, which was released in March, is looking at the other aspects of teacher professionalism. So that's to give you a little sense of how we approach this. And then in the second volume, we have a first chapters, which brings all the pieces together. It provides an overview of the main findings from both volumes, and it provides a set of 43 policy pointers which emerge from these findings, as well as trade-offs for policymakers in designing teacher policies. Clearly, not all of the pointers apply to all countries, so I'll try to give you a little glimpse of which ones could be particularly relevant in the Middle East context, and also in the context of the COVID crisis. All of that is structured along the different stages of the teaching career pathway, which I just presented, connecting the results on different issues into 17 overarching goals for policy, and providing some country examples. I won't be able to go into all of the details in 20 minutes, but you will have some examples in the presentation to look at. I also had a look at work done by other colleagues within the Directorate for Education and Skills on the Middle East countries. So there is a policy review of education in Saudi Arabia, and also 10 lessons from Talis for the United Arab Emirates. So that's what I will use in order to identify potentially relevant items and policy pointers for Middle East countries, and also some pointers relevant in the COVID-19 context. So that's to give you a little bit of a signal of how I will highlight some specific issues. So the first goal, attracting and selecting high caliber candidates into teacher education and leadership preparation. So the first goal is to monitor the workforce dynamics and develop a diverse workforce. So forecasting human resource needs of the system, preparing for the renewal in countries with aging workforces. That's not the case in your countries in general. Designing effective recruitment campaign, encouraging both genders to join the ranks of teachers and school leaders, and making sure that the candidates you select show high levels of intrinsic motivation. And that's a little bit of an issue based on the OECD education policy review in Saudi Arabia. So that might be something for policymakers to think about. The second goal is to enhance the prestige of the teaching careers as a key element of the attractiveness. Andreas mentioned that. And that's about designing effective communication and media campaign to promote the complexity and intellectual stimulation of the teaching careers, really pointing out to the intellectual attractiveness, not only salary and working conditions issues, as well as a contribution to society. That's something which really emerged strongly in Talis findings, that's the main rationale why people want to become teachers. And developing a systemic approach to boost the prestige and status of the profession and attract quality candidates in those roles. We provided you some examples of what has been done in Estonia or Sweden. And the references to box refers, the first number is volume, chapter, and number of the box. So you can go back to Talis reports to have more details on these issues. And in terms of boosting the prestige, overall, Talis data shows that UAE teachers feel that they are valued by society. It's a bit less the case in Saudi Arabia. And that's also something, this low prestige, which was flagged in the OECD education policy review in the case of Saudi Arabia. Provide high quality initial education to teachers or pre-service training for future teachers and school leaders. So here the idea is to offer alternative paths into the profession while preserving quality training if you don't go through a full teacher training program, fostering pre-service preparation for school leaders, and ensuring links between the content of initial teacher education and future professional development activities, which is not always the case. Another goal is to provide high quality professional development through the career with a focus on high needs area in particular. And one of the things which earlier cycles of TALIS showed is that school-based and collaborative professional development with active activities that respond to local needs are more likely to be considered impactful by teachers and tend to have more of an impact. So it has to be adapted to school-specific context. We also need to tailor support for integrating information and communication technologies into teaching and disseminating good practices in this area. We also need to work, so that's general recommendation on incorporating teaching strategies for diverse settings in the curriculum of different countries, but also for initial and continuous teacher training, as well as reinforcing training for teaching students with special needs. And in that respect, of course, managing diversity is more of an issue in the UAE, less so in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Clearly, the teachers in the UAE feel confident in this area, but still there are a couple of them who struggle and express a high need in this area. So further professional development is probably still needed. Obviously, with the COVID crisis, supporting the use of ICT for teaching has become more prominent. So before the crisis, if we look at TALIS data, it was very widespread, the use of ICT for teaching in the UAE, but less so in Saudi Arabia. And still 10% of UAE teachers reported that they had a high need for professional development in this area. So that's something which you need to make sure that all teachers get professional development to manage the crisis. And special needs, teaching special needs students is also something which is quite prominent. What we know is that students with different needs, different profiles tend to have suffered more from the school closures, and therefore it's becoming more and more important to manage the crisis. What we find is that in the Middle East countries, there is a high need for professional development in managing classrooms with different ability levels for 18% of teachers in the UAE and 28% of them in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So clearly there is a demand and an unmet demand for some teachers. Lift barriers to participation in professional development, providing time, that's clearly something quite important, especially in the context of the COVID crisis, if we're talking about ICT competencies for teachers, as well as providing the right incentives to participate in professional development. Also providing, and we're now moving to the second goal of supporting the teaching professionals' growth through induction, mentoring, and collaboration. Providing novice teachers and newly appointed school leaders with support is something which is quite important. So reviewing the distribution of novice teachers to schools. In quite a few countries, the novice teachers end up in the most difficult schools, which is clearly not the way to go. Giving school leaders also an active role in the development and promotion of induction programs and mentoring opportunities within the schools, and developing mentoring programs for newly appointed school leaders themselves, so that they can also get the support when they get into the job. And clearly the impact of induction on teachers' efficacy is particularly strong in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It's, I mean, basically the two countries where this has most of an impact. So induction is clearly something which is valuable in the Middle East context. But at the same time, what we find is that even though participation is above the OECD average, there are still large proportions of teachers who do not receive induction nor have a mentor. So that's clearly one area where you can do better. Making the most of teachers' time to support quality teaching and the use of effective teaching practices. And here, in terms of support to teachers in using different practices, what the UAE review from TALIS data focused on was the fact that cognitive activation practices could be used more broadly. There is a gap between what teachers report in TALIS and what PISA students perceived and report. So clearly that's probably one area which could be enhanced. And also the use of formative assessment and the introduction of cooperative project-based learning is something which you could consider in the region. Also, of course, rethinking teachers' schedules and school time and space to promote small group instructions. If you need to manage social distanciation, for instance, so we'll really need to be more creative in how to manage school schedules and classes. Fostering a school and classroom climate conducive to student learning and well-being. One of the salient findings from TALIS is that in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, teachers lose more instruction time compared to OECD countries, and just keeping order in the classroom and getting the students to follow classroom rules. And that's something which we observe not only through TALIS data, but also through PISA data. So it seems to be a real issue. Developing a collaborative culture within the schools by harnessing the potential of collaborative professional development, professional learning communities to initiate and spread a culture of collaboration within the schools. And what we find in TALIS is that the deeper forms of collaboration, like observations of other teachers, team teaching, are not as used in the Middle East countries participating, and that's slightly below the OECD average for the United Arab Emirates, but significantly below in the case of Saudi Arabia. So clearly there is a potential to harness on fostering collaboration in your region. Fostering a collegial climate within the school to encourage voluntary contribution among teachers and collaboration among teachers. And that's particularly important when you move to distance learning, if you have to go back to that arrangement, because it can save time and help teachers focus on supporting individual students rather than just preparing their classes. And building on collaboration champions and distributed leadership within schools in order to really build on teachers who are native, natural leaders, if you want, in the school. Fostering mentoring and peer feedback as key attributes of professional work. That's what you get in most professions, but not yet enough in teaching in many countries. So that goes through fostering a growth mindset and a culture of formative feedback within the profession and for teachers themselves, encouraging and mainstreaming the most impactful forms of feedback according to teachers, and encouraging mentoring and feedback at all stages of the career. It's not only when you start, but even as an experienced teachers, you can always learn, and sometimes you can even learn from the novice teachers in some areas. And here what I wanted to flag is that the COVID crisis is an unprecedented context, but it's also an unprecedented opportunity because it forces everyone to implement new solutions, think out of the box, experiment and innovate. So really there is, it is a crisis, it's complicated to manage, but it's also a formidable opportunity to really unleash some new ways of thinking of the profession. And of course, encouraging mentoring and feedback at all stages of the career. Because we are moving to online classes, it's also easier for the teachers to look at their colleagues and providing feedback, which might not have been possible in a regular class schedule. Fostering leadership at all levels of the system. So we really need to push a sense of agency among teachers by giving them more autonomy and also distributing leadership and decision-making within the school. Strengthening school leadership, especially when it comes to instructional leadership, and improving system leadership by listening more to teachers. And listening to the voice of teachers and school leaders in the policy debate. Clearly, that's something which can be useful. So clearly, COVID-19 crisis is providing a lot of opportunities for teachers to really take control of new ways of teaching and learning, but also we need to listen more to what they have to say, and I can only flag what we get from TALIS, and it can be a useful way, but also through national surveys to really listen to them and to the needs they have in this particular moment. As to empowering teaching professionals, we also need to make the most of school leaders' time to foster instructional leadership. That's quite important. And we need to have clear professional standards for school leaders themselves, as well as build capacity for instructional leadership by recruiting instructional leaders among the teachers. So most systems are moving.
You have 2 minutes only, please.
Sorry. We have most systems now moving to career structures where experienced teachers provide instructional leadership to younger ones. And that's something which can emerge also from the crisis. Link appraisal with teachers' career progression. I won't go into this. There is a workshop on that topic tomorrow. And retaining professionals through fulfilling and rewarding work conditions, well-being, and satisfactory job. Here the goal really is to providing attractive working conditions, and that entails entering a constructive dialogue with the profession to improve not only the financial package, but also the working conditions of teachers over time, considering revamping their career structures and salary scales. I referred to that before. Paying attention to how teaching professions compete with other job opportunities for school leaders, especially in public institutions compared to private ones, and reducing the reliance on short-term contracts of less than 1 year, which are really detrimental to stress and engagement of teachers. With respect to stress and well-being of teachers, clearly we need in this moment to help teachers build resilience.
Karin?
Yeah, I'm almost done. Don't worry. So we need to help them build resilience to curb stress and reduce attrition. And last but not least, we need to foster the intellectual fulfillment of the profession, as mentioned by Andreas, and that has to do with boosting job satisfaction and providing the right conditions for this, targeting policies to the different profiles and age of teachers and specific challenges in countries, as well as retaining teachers in the most difficult schools. And all of that, if we do it, is likely to boost teachers' sense of fulfillment and help retain them both in the profession, but also in the more difficult schools. So that's all I wanted to flag today in terms of what we get from TALIS in terms of policy directions. We have 2 countries in the region in TALIS 2018, but we are now recruiting for the next cycle. So if other countries are interested, please reach out to us. And thank you for this.
شكرا جزيلا، شكرا كارين. لاحظنا الحقيقة يعني استطعنا أن نطلع على كثير من التجارب العالمية، على كثير من الاستجابات من دول العالم في اثناء ازمه كورونا، وايضا يعني كان هناك سياسات مختلفه وركزت ايضا على الكثير من السياسات التي تبنتها المنطقه العربيه، وعلى وجه الخصوص المملكه العربيه السعوديه ودوله الامارات. ولاحظنا ان التباين، وانها ايضا كيف بالامكان ان تتحول التحديات الى فرص، وكيف بالامكان ان يتم استيعاب المعطيات الجديده لتحسين سياسات المعلمين وايضا جوده الاداء. ويعني وانا ملاحظ ان هناك كثير من الاسئله وكثير من يعني التساؤلات، وايضا الكثير من الاشادات بما قدم. شكرا جزيلا كريم. الان ننتقل الى المتحدثه الثانيه، والمتحدثه الثانيه هي واحده من اعلام التعليم في ليس فقط على مستوى بلدها ولكن على مستوى العالم، وايضا المكان الذي تعمل به ايضا هو له يعني سمعه غير عاديه على مستوى العالم ايضا، وهو المعهد يعني جميعنا يعرف المعهد الوطني للتربيه في سنغافوره. والسيده والبروفيسوره ليو لي لينغ هي عميده تعليم المعلمين بالمعهد الوطني، ولها باع طويل ليس فقط في مجال التعليم ولكن ايضا بحكم تخصصها في مجال اللغات التطبيقية استطاعت أيضا أن تمد خبرتها إلى مجالات أوسع، واستطاعت أيضا من خلال العمل الممتد مع المعهد إلى أن تصل خبرتها إلى ليس فقط على مستوى سنغافورة ولكن إلى كثير من بلدان العالم، وحازت على كثير من الجوائز، وهي غنية عن التعريف. كثير من الزملاء في القطاع التربوي يقرؤون البروفيسورة ليو كتاباتها وأيضا يعني نواتج أبحاثها. لن أطيل لكنني سأترك المجال للبروفيسورة لولي لينغ لتحدثنا حول التجربة السنغافورية في هذا المجال، وأنا متأكد تماما أن الجميع مشتاق إلى أن يسمع لهذا. قبل أيضا أن ننتقل وأرحب أيضا، لأن لم أرحب في البداية بالبروفيسور فرناندو من جامعة هارفارد، الآن انضم إلينا وسوف يتبع السيدة ليو بعد أن تكمل محاضرتها بإذن الله. تفضلي بروفيسورة.
Hi, a very good, I don't know which part of the world you are, but for me it's good evening, for you it's good afternoon, and I think for Professor Fernando it will be good morning. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about teacher education in pandemic times, not exactly the post-pandemic times as yet, sharing with you the Singaporean experience. Next slide. Yes. We all know that the worldwide disruptions have occurred in recent times because of not just the fourth industrial revolution, but the COVID-19 pandemic that we face. We know from the McKinsey estimate that at least 800 million jobs have been displaced and about 38 million people have been infected worldwide. And what have they revealed about our education systems? Honestly, that we've been unprepared for the multiple disruptions. We're not robust and resilient enough. And a lot, unfortunately, of inequality has been exposed. I would like to quote our Minister for Education, newly appointed, Mr. Lawrence Wong, who is also the chair of the multi-ministry task force looking at the COVID-19 control in Singapore, that in the midst of crisis, we are seizing opportunities to reshape our education system for the longer term and to accelerate improvements in the way we teach and learn. So what do we have to do in these pandemic times? We need to seize opportunities through strengthening the foundations that we already have and building on them. So it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but building on our strong foundations. Secondly, we need to seize the chance to rethink systems so that we can be more resilient, nimble, and innovative. And thirdly, our rethinking cannot be taken wholesale from a different context. The rethinking necessarily needs to be contextual. In two reports that were published just 2 years apart by the World Economic Forum, it predicts the top 10 skills that employers would want in 2015 and 2020. But these were in fact published in 2016 and 2018. Look on the left, what has changed on the right. Complex problem solving has come up top, and I don't really have time to talk about all of them, but I'd like to say that complex problem solving has become at the forefront of global nations trying to come together to look at ways in which we can overcome the pandemic crisis brought about by COVID-19. Next, I would like to now talk about some of the things that we need. Next slide, please. And I know that Andreas, as well as Karine, has just talked from the OECD perspective, but I think it's important for us to relook the kind of competence that the OECD Education 2030 framework has come up with. And I quote, "The concept of competency implies more than just the acquisition of knowledge and skills. It involves the mobilization of knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values to meet complex demands. Future-ready students will need both broad as well as specialized knowledge." Next. We know that there are 3 transformative competencies that the OECD has spoken about, which is to create new value, to reconcile tensions and dilemmas, and to take responsibility for our actions. All of these appear to be very predictive of the current crisis that we are facing, even though when we all started work on the Education 2030 framework, no one could imagine a crisis of this proportion hitting the entire world. Next. I would now like to talk about some of the more current research and literature that talks about rethinking education paradigms for the future, published by different organizations. For example, McKinsey & Co. has the 5 R's of getting back to school. First of all, we need to have a resolve to solve at hand what is the problem that we're facing. Secondly, we need to have the resilience in order not to give up, even in the midst of crisis, and we need to cope. Thirdly, we need to endeavor to return to schools and reopen them as soon as it is safe. Fourthly, we need to reimagine what education needs and what COVID has taught us about how we need to change and how quickly we need to change. And of course, this can only be brought about if we have educational reform. Next. So what does crisis education look like? According to Kidman and Chang 2020, we need to have 21st century competencies, and education in times of crisis really is about making sure that our students know and are able to discern between what is real and what is fake news, because in this case, believing in fake news can be extremely dangerous. And fourthly, of course, social learning is very much needed, and we need to try to recreate social learning even as we continue learning and teaching in the midst of the pandemic. Next. The 3 ways that the coronavirus pandemic can reshape education is mentioned by Tam and Al Azhar in another WE Forum document. One, it's really about educational innovations, that it has become the catalyst for all our digital and educational innovative solutions. All of us as educators may have preached to our students to change, but it is nothing like COVID-19 changing the way that we live, the way that we work, the way that we learn overnight and forever. We also realize that the quality of learning and digital access is extremely important, and at-risk and less affluent and less digitally savvy families suffer. And for this, in order to bring about learning in an equitable fashion, we realize the importance of public and private partnerships in order for diverse stakeholders to come together to bring about the quality of learning and access to all students. Next. Linda Darling-Hammond in the Learning Policy Institute report talks about a framework for restarting and reinventing school, and she mentions 10 points. First of all, we need to close the digital divide that I talked about. Secondly, we need to strengthen the kind of distance and blended learning that we are all trying to accomplish very much from the couches of our seats at homes. Thirdly, we need truly to assess what students need in an online or blended learning platform. Fourthly, we need to ensure support for both social and emotional learning. Fifthly, learning online is not the same in terms of learning space, learning time. We need to provide more expanded learning time and opportunities for our students. Sixthly, we need to emphasize authentic, culturally responsive learning. Seventh, we need to redesign schools for much stronger public-private partnerships. Eighth, we need to establish community schools and wrap-around supports in order to bring about learning even to the most remote parts of huge countries. Ninth, we need to prepare educators for reinventing schools, as the pandemic has shown us that there is no time for change. The change has to be now and we need to keep on moving. And finally, we need to leverage on more equitable and adequate school funding in order to ensure continued learning. So what has really happened is that our teachers are really still at the forefront of systemic change. Why is that so? First of all, they are professionals and experts in pedagogical knowledge. Secondly, they share and collaborate with their peers in an active learning culture in schools. Thirdly, they provide and they can design a strong curriculum framework. And fourthly, they have the capacity to design positive outcomes in teaching and learning. So where does the reform start? With teachers right in their classrooms, even if the physical classroom has changed. Next. We talk about the changing roles of teachers, and what are they? Today, one of the main roles that teachers have is that of a healthcare worker. Very basic knowledge about whether a person looks well, ability to take temperature, ability to sanitize places is extremely important. The teacher is also a social worker because we know that COVID-19 during lockdown has caused a lot of mental and emotional stress, both on the teacher as well as on students. Thirdly, the teacher is also someone who needs to be at the forefront of being very comfortable with infrastructure of information technology and IT and digital tools, because when something breaks down, there's really no one to turn to. Next. I would now like to focus very quickly on the Singapore situation. How do we cope with a pandemic? What are we thinking at this point in time? First, let's go back to the basics. According to our founding Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, for finally, just as good as country is as good as its citizens, so its citizens are really only as good as its teachers. From the founding of Singapore, a very young nation, city-state, since 1965 to the present, we see teachers as nation builders who shape the future of our nation, one student at a time. Next, I would like to talk to you about our values, skills, and knowledge model for the 21st century. Because this is being recorded, I couldn't actually cut and paste the exact model for you. So we'll now just have to show it to you through an online link, which will take us just 1 second to show up. The value, skills, and knowledge model is about a three-pronged set of values that are intertwined into a big pillar of values that takes center stage in our teacher education model. The first value paradigm is learner-centeredness, that the reason why you and I exist as educators or policymakers for education is truly because of wanting to better the learning of the learner seated right in the center of our classroom. And whether that classroom has now become on a virtual platform does not matter. The learner is at the center of everything that we do as teachers and as educators. Secondly, the second value is about a strong sense of teacher identity, because research has shown us that teachers who feel proud of becoming teachers are likely to A, stay longer in the profession, and B, contribute back into growing the profession. And thirdly, brings us to the next point, teachers, unlike any other profession, have to be mentors and stewards to build up the next generation of teachers. And wrapped around the values and knowledge, wrapped around the three-pronged set of values would be the knowledge and skills of the 21st century. We now move back to the set of slides that we have. Apologies, because this has gone online and we have no choice but to do it in a way that is copyright friendly. I would now like to think about the expanding environment framework, the rethinking of our values-based education, even as we speak. This is an adapted model that is something that we've come up with. Really, when we look at values-based education, we look at the expanding environment, starting with myself. So our students look deep into themselves. When they come into our programs, we give them a personal and professional development program that really looks into their personhood as a teacher. Why did they join teaching? We move on to the community. Every student teacher is involved in a community involvement project of their choice. And then we move on to My Nation, a core course known as Singapore Kaleidoscope that makes use of appreciative inquiry for students to admire and appreciate the culture and heritage of the country. And finally, My World is about exposing our students to experiences outside of Singapore through international practicum exchanges and semesters abroad. It is very interesting how we need to deal with this in the present context. I'll talk about it. But more importantly, right in the center of this globe is the compass pointing to the true north. And at the center of the values-based education is about character and citizenship education. Next slide, please. So our vision for teacher education is that we want our graduates to be creators of knowledge, facilitators of learning, architects of learning environments, shapers of characters, and leaders of educational change. And all of this has come to the forefront as we know that the change is not tomorrow, the change is now, and we have to move very quickly. Next slide, please. We have designed the NIE Learning for Life framework, which is about lifelong learning, which means that teacher education and learning does not stop at pre-service, but continues to the beginning and professional teacher phase. Life-wise learning is about building the professional ethos and values of the teachers. It's about life-deep learning, which is deepening the professional expertise of teachers' career, and life-wide learning, which is about providing multiple perspectives. We move very quickly to the next slide. What are the qualities that teachers need for future readiness? Well, I've come up with 8 attributes, and I'll show you examples of teachers on the forefront who demonstrate these values. Next, the first we are talking about is resilience. So in Singapore, the government launched the SG United Jobs and Skills Package, offering close to 100,000 jobs, provided people are open to being reskilled. Let's move on to the next one quickly, which is about perseverance. This is a story of a 63-year-old man who moved from retrenchment to re-employment with deep meaning. He was in the oil industry and gas industry. He was retrenched and he joined nursing. Mr. Clement Ng was retrenched and decided to do something more meaningful. And he realized that the need for caregivers would increase with Singapore's aging population, and he joined teaching. Sorry, he joined nursing. Being adaptable, we know that many cabin crew around the world, Singapore Airlines is not spared. Cabin crew like have been redeployed to other roles as care ambassadors in various hospitals. Next. We talk about being innovative. No matter how old we are, we must be able to digitalize our work. We've seen hawkers, very aged, but who have had to move to an online platform in order to survive. Next. We need to be nimble. This talks about a man who changed his skill set in IT to be able to look at medical data analytics in this crisis. Next. We talk about being purposeful. This is a real, true story of a student teacher who was a high-flying banker. He joined the profession last year because he feels that the spiritual fulfillment in being a teacher is priceless. Next slide, please. We talk about passion. Again, this is a mid-career teacher who joined the profession last year because for the first time in her life, she wanted to do her best because she finally cared. When she did contract teaching, she realized that teaching was hard work, and her heart is so full because every day she looks forward to what she has to do. Next. We talk about being a true professional, and our alumni, our degree student, reflects about all the different values-based framework that we've given that helps to expose them to the global issues, and all of it has made her impressed upon her that she should aspire to be a professional teacher. Going ahead, this is the Future Ready Wheel for Future Ready learners, which you can read about. But I would like to move on to the next slide about what we did during the pandemic, which is important. Rigorous programs, 100% of our courses were online.
You have 2 minutes.
How many minutes, sorry?
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. So I'll just quickly finish with this slide. Yes. So 100% of our classes were online during the circuit breaker period, which is the way that Singapore has called our lockdown. And the assessments were all rescaled, no paper and pencil exams. We employed, of course, innovative pedagogies through online platforms. And in terms of the multiple perspectives, we have moved into ways of conducting international practicum webinars, as well as enacting internship programs only through work from home environments such as this. For professional practice, I had the real story of 300 over teachers, student teachers out on the final practicum. 55% of the time they had face-to-face classes, and the rest of the 45% had to be on a virtual home-based learning platform as they are completing their high-stakes final practicum. It was very challenging. And finally, of course, above all, we realized that building teacher professionalism in the crisis and beyond is really about enhancing the values-based education framework. Let's move on. The best course of action we can take as teachers is to deepen the culture and spirit of lifelong learning. And for this reason, next slide, we have therefore decided as a fraternity to launch the Skills Future for Educators in 6 priority areas. And this gives you an insight. I don't have time to elaborate on what we're looking at in the future, and the future begins now. Next, I would like to end, I think I can't go on any further from this slide, with a very short video about how we saluted our teachers during the recent October Teachers' Day celebration. And I think the hosts are happy to play the video for you. Thank you. And I'll end there for now.
Thank you.
It's just the sound that's not. Yeah, there's no sound in the video.
There's no sound.
across the country, minds were still eager to learn. And teachers were still eager to teach. Through the crisis, the lessons continued. Through the hardships, our educators innovated. And now that our institutions of education have reopened, our teachers continue to find new ways to adapt their lessons to this new environment. Teachers of Singapore, we salute you.
Can you finish it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. شكرا جزيلا. شكرا بروفيسور. الحقيقة تحدثت البروفيسور لي على ليس فقط إعادة التموضع ولكن إعادة التفكير. إعادة التفكير في التعليم، إعادة التفكير في قضايا إعداد المعلمين، إعادة التفكير ليس فقط في قضايا إعداد المعلمين كبرنامج تعليمي ولكن أيضا في فلسفة الإعداد. سواء كان من حيث المهارات أو كان من حيث أيضا القدرات أو كان من حيث أيضا يعني البناء أو من حيث العلاقة المجتمعية، بما معنى نظرة كلية يعني طافت لنا إلى النظرة الكلية لإعادة التفكير وإعادة البناء لموضوع إعداد المعلمين يعني في سنغافورة. وأنا لاحظت أن كثير من الأسئلة حول هذا الموضوع. أنتقل الآن لكي نكسب الوقت، أنتقل الآن إلى يعني متحدث آخر وهو أيضا أحد الرموز الكبيرة في قطاع التعليم، ليس فقط في الإطار النظري وهو كذلك، لكنه أيضا إلى جانب القطاع النظري هو في الجانب العملي وعلاقاته الواسعة الممتدة في كل قارات العالم. البروفيسور فرناندو ريمرز هو بروفيسور في جامعة هارفارد وله اهتمامات ليس فقط في مجال التدريس ولكن ايضا في مجال التطبيقات، في مجال العمل التربوي وفلسفه التعليم، وهو ايضا واحد من اللجنه الدوليه المعنيه باعاده التفكير للمستقبل التعليم 2035 الموجوده على مستوى العالم والتي تحت اليونسكو. لن أطيل لأن سيرة فرناندو سيرة طويلة وسيرة أيضا كبيرة، لكن سأترك له المجال للحديث حول يعني التجارب إعداد المعلمين المختلفة من خلال أيضا كتبه القيمة التي أنتجها في هذا المجال ومن خلال أيضا البيئة التعليمية التي يعمل فيها وبحكم الاختصاص والتخصص. Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, Abdul Salam. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you today discussing what is it that governments can do to strengthen a continuum of development so that we have quality teachers. I would like to share my screen right now so that I can share a few slides just to support my presentation. Can you see my slides right now?
Yes,
Excellent.
we can.
Thank you very much. Let me just see. I think there is... Yeah, just give me a moment. There you go, much better. All right, so I'm going to talk about 6 interrelated topics. The context of teacher education, the conversation is happening in the context of expanding curricular goals. I'm going to provide the context of the research that informs what I'm going to present, and I'm going to summarize 3 of our most recent studies. So as beginning with the inclusion of education in the Declaration of Human Rights, humanity has been trying to prepare students to become architects of their own lives. Look at section 2 of Article 26, right? Education shall be directed to the development, the full development of the personality, the strengthening and respect for human rights, promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and the activities of the UN and the maintenance of peace. I think that those topics are as relevant today as they were when those words were written. UNESCO has 3 times in its history commissioned 3 reports that have really provided guidance to governments in broadening the goals of the curriculum. The first one in 1972, Learning to Be, that put forth the notion that we should be preparing people to become lifelong learners. The next one in 1996, the Delors report, that suggested that education really should be based on 4 pillars, of which this report emphasized learning to live with others. And the third one is a commission that is currently working on those topics. The UN, as part of this very ambitious and inclusive framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, has a target that gives us a lot of good direction on what it is that education should be doing. Learners should acquire knowledge and skills to promote sustainable development, including education for sustainable development, human rights, gender equality, promotion of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of the contribution of culture to develop. I think this gives us a very clear set of aspirations to guide what it is that schools should be doing in developing a breadth of skills that cultivate, that educate the whole person. Since Iling just preceded me, this is from Singapore. It's a beautiful representation. She talked about that, of how it is that we should be thinking about curriculum at the moment. And the way we should, as she explained, you have ethical values, core values at the center, but the emphasis here is on competencies. The emphasis is on what is the profile of the graduate. What do we want this graduate to be able to know, to care about, to be able to do when they leave our schools? So the goal of the Global Education Innovation Initiative is to advance knowledge about how to do those things, to help us better understand how leaders and practitioners in diverse education systems define and practice teaching and learning which is relevant to the 21st century. And I'm delighted. I want to recognize the Arab Bureau for Education in the Gulf States, which has translated into Arabic and published very many of our publications. And I know you have received them. And we advance this goal through 3 sets of interrelated activities. We conduct applied research, we promote informed dialogues, and we develop practical tools that can help a teacher figure out, so what do we need to do differently on Monday morning? We have conducted and published so far 6 studies, of which one focuses particularly in the Arab world. Learning to Improve the World is an impact evaluation of a program to develop entrepreneurial skills among high school students. I think it's telling of how many people at this time of this pandemic are taking this time to think deeply, to rethink what education should be about, that our 3 most recent books, all published since the pandemic started, have generated quite a bit of interest. On this link, you can download these books. But for example, our book, Empowering Teachers to Build a Better World, of which I'll be saying a few words, published in April of this year, has been downloaded 123,000 times. Our book, Audacious Education Purposes, which is a comparative analysis of 8 national reforms that expanded the goals of the curriculum, not exactly popular literature, has been downloaded 83,000 times. These are our 2 forthcoming books. They will be published November 1st. One of them is a book on how do we address climate change from schools, and the other one is about implementation of deeper learning and 21st century reforms, and the topic of teacher education is central in this book. The second set of things that we do is we convene informed dialogues. We basically make visible knowledge which practitioners generate in the context of solving problems, because we think this knowledge needs to enter the conversation of reform. So for example, our book, Letters to a New Minister of Education, is a book written by ministers of education or former ministers, including Dr. Abdus Salam Al-Jufi. And the point of this is to ask these people to reflect on what they have learned from practice so that we can, through that knowledge, inspire others, inform others on the processes of changing education. We have produced our two latest books in this genre are Leading Education Through COVID, which focuses specifically on the impact that that the pandemic has had on education, and on what a range of 55 leaders around the world have done to mitigate that impact. And the book on the right-hand side, which right now is only published in Spanish, is a book in which ministers of education of countries in Latin America reflect on how this pandemic has challenged their own leadership. So this is a second strand of things we do. And then lastly, we develop curriculum resources. These are all curriculum resources aligned with a capacious and ambitious vision connected to the UN Sustainable Development Goals that have been, two of these have been translated into Arabic, and these are in use in thousands of schools around the world. So that's the context in which I'm going to be presenting some of our research which pertains particularly to teacher education. Now, with teacher education, there is a paradox. And the paradox is that in well-designed, small, controlled studies, we know that teacher quality matters greatly to the performance of students. But there is limited evidence that professional development, at least delivered at scale, does matter. In other words, there are a number of studies that show that many of the programs that exist that support teachers actually do not translate into changes in instructional practices. Now, much of that existing evidence focuses on a narrow range of outcomes for students: literacy, math, and science. We have very limited evidence that looks at the impact of teacher professional development in the pedagogical capacity of teachers to educate the whole child in a broad range of competencies. We also know that teachers receive much professional development, but still seem unprepared. It's very interesting. Dr. Tremblay was citing TALIS, an extremely valuable cross-national study. If you look at the results from TALIS, three things emerge. You realize that teachers receive a lot of professional development. They also say that they value it. But when you ask principals, what are one of the main barriers to quality, one of the very top is the teachers are not prepared. So how is it possible that we're spending all this money that teachers seem to like what they receive, and still there is no visible connection between that and practice? So that is the paradox that we face. So let me share with you the results of this study. I think you all have received the book. This book is published in Arabic. What this study set out to do was very simple. We identified programs around the world on which there was evidence that they were succeeding at developing the capacity of teachers to teach to a broad range of outcomes. These were studies on which there were already existing impact evaluations, and we knew they were good. And we said, let's try to figure out the DNA of those studies. What do they actually do? And then after we had done those case studies, we looked across and we said, what do they have in common? And the story is very telling, because when we finished that study, I didn't know what title to give to the book. We were going to call this something on professional development, but we realized that what these programs had in common, there is a distinct pattern of what they have in common, doesn't look at all like what most people call professional development. It certainly doesn't look at all like your typical 2-day workshop or 3-day workshop where people are pulled out from the schools. Instead, what these programs look like is a number of organizations work with schools, with entire schools, and they engage staff in the school in a process of envisioning targets for improvement, school-wide targets for improvement. And then they map backwards from those. What is it that people in the school are going to need to learn to be able to achieve that? So in many ways, these programs are more strategies of organizational development of the schools, of building the capacity of schools than the organization, than they are programs of individual professional development. The unit of intervention is not the teacher. The unit of intervention is the school. These programs understand that teaching quality, I think that there is a misconception that has done a lot of harm to how we think about professional development, which is an idea. I think it was first published in a McKinsey report with very good intentions, but it really was an incorrect concept. And the idea was no education system can exceed the quality of its teachers. What is wrong about that idea is that it equates teaching quality with individual teacher quality. And teaching is not an individual construction. Teaching is like listening to an orchestra, listening to a concert. It is a collective enterprise. It requires the coordinated work of a number of people. And what these programs do is they seem to understand that. They seem to understand that if you're going to transform teaching, you need to transform the school, not one teacher. Obviously, helping individuals learn is important, but that in and of itself is insufficient. So anyway, that's what we set out to do in this study. So we studied programs that on the surface are very different. We look in depth at a program in Chile. It's an inquiry-based program to teach science to very poor kids, to teach them to think like scientists. We look at one of the innovation districts in China, where the entire district engages in a process of research around 21st century pedagogy. We look at a program in Colombia that combines citizenship education with academic excellence. We look at a program in India that focuses on the development of life skills. We look at a program in Mexico that uses technology to help teams in schools transform, make the school more effective. We look at a program in the US that for the last 3 decades has been combining the development of academic excellence with character. And in Singapore, in fact, Eileen was one of our co-authors, we looked at the way in which Singapore prepares its teachers to become leaders of school transformation. So that's what we looked at. And so basically we identified these programs, we interviewed key stakeholders, we analyzed documents, we conducted observations, and then we did a cross-case analysis. And what are the elements that these programs have in common? I wasn't sure what to find because on the surface, what we're going to find, on the surface, they are very different. But in fact, there is a distinct set of traits these programs have. They all understand that teachers are adults. Teachers are not blank slates, and their work is socially situated. And so all these programs develop professional development that is responsive to the needs that teachers have for learning. There's not someone outside from the school deciding what the teacher needs to learn. Those teams in schools participate in developing what are their goals for professional development. All these programs, none of these programs are quick fixes of the variety of let's pull people from the school, bring them to a great conference. All of these programs involve sustained over a year or multiple years and extensive opportunities for teachers to build capacities. Extensive. So there are many things that happen in the schools. Many of these programs create job-embedded opportunities for teachers to learn. The modalities of PD varied. They included things such as providing teachers with books that they could read and they could discuss, engaging them in discussions with peers, and providing coaching from mentors, demonstrating new practices, engaging teachers in independent research projects where teachers learn to conduct experiments and to analyze the results of that, and providing them opportunities for reflection. So basically, these programs saturated the institution of the school with opportunities for these teachers to learn. The curriculum of these programs covers a blend of capacities. None of these programs are of the sort, we're going to teach you a new set of tricks. They go from a very broad focus on helping students develop particular capacities to very granular identification of pedagogies and instructional practices that can help students gain those skills. The curriculum reflects a view of learning that includes, of course, cognitive skills, but in interaction with socio-emotional skills. Professional development, as I mentioned, includes a variety of activities, a mix of opportunities, mostly in the context of the schools where teachers teach. And then all these programs are led by organizations outside the school. These are not programs that are led just by the schools, but in larger networks coordinated either by a teacher training institution or by an NGO that actually build partnerships with a range of other societies as a way to augment the capacity of the schools. they adopt a whole school approach, as I mentioned, as opposed to helping individual teachers. I won't get into measurement. The organizations themselves that lead these programs all demonstrate a learning orientation. Just very briefly, because I know I'm running out of time, what we did with this book was basically replicate that study, but this time we contrasted programs that had gone to scale in an entire country, all teachers, 3 programs of that sort, with 3 programs that had achieved a lot of scale, but not completely national. So we looked at a program in England to promote mastery learning in mathematics, a program in rural Colombia to support all teachers with personalized learning, a program in Mexico to help advance a very ambitious curriculum reform. Those are 3 national programs. And then the large network programs are a program in India, the Telangana Social Welfare Program, designed to develop the capacity of teachers to educate whole children in very poor communities. Cambodia's New Generation Schools Reform, essentially a program of charter schools, and then a program in a rather small district, but very high-performing district in Massachusetts, Burlington Public Schools. Essentially, these findings replicated the conclusions of the previous studies with a couple of nuances, which I want to highlight. So all of them reflect, again, a conception of teachers as adult learnings. I want to underscore that because I have come across so many ministries where someone in the minister's office decides, well, I think the teacher needs to learn this now, and they create a program. And then someone else has another idea, and then another idea. And this kind of uncoordinated, from the top approach to preparing teachers, I believe is at the root of this paradox that I was talking about, that most of these actually doesn't make any difference, doesn't help schools change. It may be interesting, it can provide entertainment, but it doesn't transform practice. The 3 national programs understand the socially situated nature of professional development, and they provide opportunities for local adaptation and for job-embedded training. But the programs that focus on the smaller networks of schools also see the learning as socially situated, but they have a much broader focus in terms of the capacities they are developing. Yes, just 2 more minutes. All these programs involve sustained and extended opportunities for teachers, extending an entire school year, and the intensity and frequency is greater, obviously, for the smaller scale programs than for the others. And this is key. We all need time to learn. We all need time to learn. And if we are serious about helping teachers build the capacity, they have to devote the time to it. There's no other way. There is no shortcut to producing great teachers. So lastly, let me just enclose. One of the things that surprised me is that none of these programs is based on a coherent theory of how education systems change, and that's what I want to move on to right now. So that is the goal of this book. It develops a coherent theory of how schools or systems change that approaches the process of change from cultural, psychological, professional, institutional, and political perspective. Why is this important? Because educational change involves many different people who all need to develop a shared vision. And people approach the process of change with different ideas, with different mindsets. A more robust theory can help us better understand other stakeholders, can help us better communicate our own ideas, and can help us develop shared vision. If I operate out of a cultural framework, and I need to communicate with someone who operates out of a political framework, and I don't know it, we're not going to communicate. And what educational change that last needs is a shared theory of mind of how change happens. And so this book is designed to provide a language to do that. So I won't have time to, I think of these perspectives as a kaleidoscope. For someone like a minister, for someone in a leadership position, if you're capable of relying on the insights that 5 complementary lenses provide you of the process of change, you will be better able to understand and to communicate with the very many stakeholders that you need to communicate. So finally, I just want to, you have all received, I believe, this short document, which basically summarizes in 13 very concrete steps, how do you build a continuum of high quality teacher education? One of the things that we try to do in this publication is to convey that transforming teacher quality is not like flicking a light switch. that it is about making sure there is alignment between a series of processes that are interdependent. And in this publication, we made them visible. And lastly, I invite you to download this book. It's an open access publication. You can download it for free and read it, because the emphasis of this book is on the implementation. How do you implement processes that transform the quality of teachers to produce deeper learning and 21st century education? I'm sorry that I ran a little bit over. I hope this was useful. Thank you so much, Abdul Salam.
شكرا جزيلا فرناندو. شكرا فرناندو. اعتقد ان الان لاحظتم انه يعني طفنا في ليس فقط يعني من المشرق الكره الارضيه من سنغافوره الى ليس فقط اماكن تواجد المتحدثين، ولكن ايضا بالخبرات التي حدثونا عنها. حدثونا على خبرات متنوعه في امريكا الجنوبيه، في اسيا، في افريقيا، في اوروبا، وبالتالي تحدثوا على كثير من القضايا. وهناك الواقع ان هناك عدد كبير من الاسئله تمتد الى تقريبا حوالي 100 سؤال، ولا استطيع ان الخصها لانه بحسب تعليمات المنظمين لا يوجد لدي الا 10 دقائق حتى انهي هذه الجلسه. لذلك انا سوف اختصر عدد من الاسئله الى اسئله موجهه بشكل رئيسي بشكل اجمالي. وسابدا بالسيده يعني كارين من الاو سي دي. هي يعني الملخص الاسئله انه انتم عملتم على دراسه كثير من الدول، وتحدثت على بعض دول الشرق الاوسط، وعلى وجه الخصوص المملكه العربيه السعوديه والامارات العربيه المتحده. هل هناك يعني امكانيه الى ان يتم تلخيص مثل هذا، وايضا امداد الدراسه الى اكثر من دوله عربيه بحيث انها تكون شامله؟ الموضوع الثاني لك سيدتي هو يعني الان مع الجوائح واثناء الازمات، كيف بالامكان ان نتحدث على يعني قضايا ازمات المعلمين انفسهم، وخاصه ما يتعلق بالجوانب النفسيه واثرها على ادائهم وتدريبهم سواء كان اثناء الخدمه او بعد الخدمه. معك دقيقتين. كارين، are you with us؟ يبدو انها ليست معنا.
Can you forward the question to someone else? معلش دكتور عبد السلام عندها مشاكل في الكونكشن.
Okay, is she still with us or not?
She's coming back. You can go ahead and ask someone else meanwhile.
The speaker. Okay. بروفيسور لين من سنغافورة. الحقيقة هناك كم كبير من الأسئلة حول موضوع إعادة التموضع وإعادة التفكير في العملية التربوية والتعليمية. وسؤالنا هو نعم ندرك تماما على أن موضوع أو التساؤلات التي ذكرت، هو ندرك تماما أن المسألة أن التعليم مهنة وليست مجرد وظيفة، وبالتالي كيف بالإمكان أن نعزز القيم كيف بالإمكان أن نعزز القيم في ظل الجائحة، وفي نفس الوقت كيف بالإمكان أن هل لديكم برامج تخدم المعلمين أثناء الخدمة وبعد الخدمة تعزز موضوع القيم، وموضوع أيضا الاحتياجات المتجددة والثورة الصناعية الرابعة وعلاقتها أيضا نتيجة أن هذا تحدي جديد. نحن الآن كمعلمين نعاني من أزمات وفي نفس الوقت نعاني من تحديات. هل بالفعل استوعبتم مثل هذه اثناء اعدادكم برامج تطويريه وخططكم في اعاده التموضع واعاده البناء؟
Hi, sorry. Is there a interpreter for the question?
No, it's a questions. But it's you know it's a complex questions. It's have different angles.
Sorry, I just rejoined. So who was the question for?
No, the question is for lead.
Okay.
Professor?
Sorry, I didn't get the question in English.
Oh,
is there? Yeah, that's the thing. Sorry.
Yeah. The questions, I mean, how you adapt your programs. I mean, in these circumstances.
Okay.
And the challenges of the four considerations.
And the challenges of the considerations. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, more or less. Okay. I didn't really have time to complete the presentation or to elaborate on some of the points that I wanted to. So I can talk a little bit. Let's talk about the final practicum, for example, right? In order to ensure that the student teachers graduated on time and the schools really needed the teachers, we first had to have meetings online with the Ministry of Education, the Professional Development Wing, to have a sign off that what we were preparing the teachers for, which is 5.5 weeks of physical face-to-face teaching and 4.5 weeks of home-based learning or online teaching, would qualify them to be teachers. A very concrete example would be, instead of 6 observations, there might be 3, you know, and for moderation, for distinction grades, for example, it would have to be on an online platform for which students may not have been prepared to do so. So there are real challenges, but I would say that if you ask me how it worked, you really do need, like what Professor Remus has said, it's a whole systemic effort. And when in coping with the pandemic, it's the same story, that there has to be a very close partnership between the National Institute of Education that prepares all schools, all teachers for schools in Singapore, the Ministry of Education, as well as working directly with all the schools. So for example, we have the names of all of these few hundred teachers who went out in the midst of this, what we call the mixed modality practicum. And we are working with the ministry and the schools to ensure that they are given special mentoring and professional development to bring them up to speed. Thank you.
معالي الدكتور عبد السلام الصوت.
اوكي ثانك يو اسف. اعود مره ثانيه الى السيده كارين. كارين، انتم عملتم على دراسه عدد من الدول ومن ضمنها الامارات العربيه المتحده والمملكه العربيه السعوديه. هل هناك لديكم مخطط الى ان تتوسعوا في بقيه الدول العربيه؟ والموضوع الثاني هو كيف يمكن يعني ان نقيس اداء المعلمين واستعدادهم وخبراتهم في ظل ظروف الازمات؟ هل عندما عملتوا الاستبيانات هل كان هذا موضوع يعني في بالكم ام ان هذا متغير جديد؟
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks a lot for these questions. So yeah, TALIS was conducted in 2018, so before the COVID crisis in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. We also had the Queen Rania Foundation in Jordan applying some questions from TALIS 2013 in Jordan. And we are now in the process of recruiting new countries to participate in the next cycle of TALIS, which will be in the field in 2024. So it is perfectly possible for more countries to join. It's the right moment to do so. They just need to reach out to me. We understand that Bahrain is likely to be part of the next participants, but if other countries are interested, please let us know. That's perfectly possible. Now, in terms of measuring teacher performance, you mean in general or during the COVID crisis?
هو ذكر في وقت الأزمات.
Okay, so that we don't have at the moment a tool for that. What we are working on is a set of a bank of question items which countries can implement in national surveys of teachers. And then what we will have is in 2025, we will have the data from a few years after the COVID crisis. And what we will also have in TALIS 2024 in terms of teacher knowledge and skills, and to respond also to Fernando's presentation, is for the first time we will be assessing teachers' pedagogical knowledge. So we will also have more objective information on professional development needs of teachers in different countries.
شكرا جزيلا. فرناندو، السؤال ايضا بنفس الكيفيه، هناك عدد من الاسئله، لكن السؤال ايضا هل كتبك غطت تجارب الدول العربيه وخاصه في مجال اعداد المعلمين؟ والموضوع الثاني، هل غطت هذه الكتب او هناك من خلال المجالات التي تعملون فيها هل غطيتم موضوع القياس وكيف يمكن بناء قدرات المعلمين او سياسات المعلمين الخاصه في القياس والتقويم في اثناء الازمات وغيرها؟
Yeah, these are very good questions. The studies that I presented were all conducted before the pandemic. We have not conducted any studies since the pandemic was declared in March of this year. Yes, several of our books deal with the question of assessment and how are these programs assessed. And what we found is that contrary to common belief that says, you cannot teach what cannot be measured. Oftentimes, those who are skeptical of whole child education, 21st century skills say, you can only manage what you can measure. Well, what we found is that all these organizations don't share that principle, that all those organizations actually operate out of a different rationale, which is you first have to be clear on what the learning outcomes are. And you have to design the pedagogies to teach that. And then you have to actually go and begin to try to teach that. And then you figure out what does it make sense to assess. So none of these programs are led by assessment, although multiple forms of formative feedback play a very important role, of course, in the improvement. Remember, we have looked at programs that have been in place for a very long time. So I guess to some extent, these programs challenge the belief that that you cannot teach that which you cannot measure. Measurement is very important, but certainly you can teach a lot of things you may not know very well how to measure, because the field of measurement is constantly evolving, and we're measuring things today. For example, the only reason why we know how to measure very well literacy is because we've been doing it for a long time. We may not know very well how to measure awareness to address climate change because we're beginning to do that. That doesn't mean that you cannot teach competencies to address climate change. It only means you have to start somewhere, and you don't need to start with the assessment. You start with clear ideas of what is it that you want people to learn.
Okay, thank you very much. Due to shortage of time, Karen, do you have anything you want to add in 1 minute?
Well, just that what we are measuring with TALIS is situations before the crisis. So we have to always be a bit careful in over-interpreting what we can do for the crisis. But at least it's giving some useful insights on challenges and areas to focus on for managing the crisis and going through it.
Thank you. Professor Loh, do you have anything? Do you want to add anything, please?
Just in one sentence, I'd like to say that many people have looked to Singapore for having very well thought through policies, implementation and everything. But we, like everyone else, we are also struggling. Of course, we are hoping to thrive and survive, not just survive, but thrive, but truly putting into practice and walking the talk, as it were, of everything that we've been standing for. Because this crisis, as I mentioned, demands that we change education immediately and forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Fernando, do you have anything to, do you want to add anything?
No, I just want to commend all of you for your professionalism and your commitment to sustaining educational opportunity in what is undoubtedly the most serious calamity for education since the right to education was included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is very important that you do this. The worst thing that we could do at this moment would be to give up, shut down the schools and say it's all too complicated, we'll deal with it when we're back to normal. Because we're not going to be back to normal for a while. And the reason is very simple. Even if we have a vaccine in 6 months and in another 6 months we can distribute it, the vaccine is not going to be 100% effective and not everyone is going to take it. So that means the vaccine is going to be another tool, like masks, like social distancing, but we have to get used to functioning in a different way for the next several years. And we also know, as Elaine also showed, that this pandemic is having multiple impacts, not just educational and health impacts. It is having huge economic impact. So in this context, sustaining educational opportunity is in and of itself extremely valuable in giving children some sense of normalcy, some sense of stability that can help them cope with what is a calamity. There is no other way to put it. You know, this is not a good thing. This is a tragedy that it happened. But it is what it is. And in that context, you're all heroes. Those of you who are teaching, who are taking your job and you understand the significance of your job to do your very best and more. There is no question in my mind that in 20, 30 years, when people look back at this period, they will ask us, what was it like to live through this pandemic? And they will ask us, you lived through the most difficult time in history when educational opportunity was crumbling. What did you do at that moment? And I hope that we can all say, I did everything within my power and even more. Thank you.
شكرا. أنا الحقيقة سعيد جدا بأن أكون مع هذه النخبة المتميزة، النخبة العالمية، النخبة المتنوعة، وأيضا معي حوالي 1500 مشاهد من قادة تربويين، من معلمين، من ممارسين، من قادة مدارس. سعدنا جدا بوجودكم معنا، سعدنا في مكتب التربية العربية دول الخليج، وفي المركز الإقليمي للجودة والتميز، وفي أيضا المركز الإقليمي للتخطيط التربوي، وفي اليونسكو بيروت المسؤول على اليونسكو في الدول العربية. سعدنا بتواجدكم معنا، وكنا أيضا محظوظين باستجاباتكم وأيضا بالاستماع إليكم. والحقيقة تعلمنا الكثير من تجاربكم، تعلمنا بما قلتموه، وهذه دروس بالنسبة لنا سنستفيد منها وسنحاول أن ننقلها إلى الميدان. وأنا متأكد أن كثير من زملائي وزميلاتي الموجودين معي الآن من خلال البث المباشر وعبر منصة زوم وايضا المنصات المختلفه سوف يعملون على يعني نقل هذه المعارف والخبرات والاستفاده، وسوف نحاول بقدر الامكان كجهات منظمه ان نتيح ما قلتموه صوتا وصوره، وايضا كعروض للجميع بشكل عبر الايميلات وايضا عبر المنصات المختلفه للمنظمين جميعا. استاذه مهره، شكرا جزيلا. اختمي اللقاء، والسلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته. شكرا كيرن، شكرا لو.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Fernandez. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Professor Len, for your cooperated with us and present this great presentation. And as Dr. Abdeslam said, that we will do our best to benefit from this and share it with all the people that they came and participate. It's almost 1,000 here, and I don't know, yet YouTube maybe more than 500 also. نشكر كل من حضر واستمر معنا حتى الآن. بإذن الله سوف يتم مشاركة العروض معكم ونتائج الحوار بإذن رب العالمين، وكذلك نتائج الورش التي سوف تعقد في اليوم الثاني. والكثير تساءل كيف يمكن التسجيل في اليوم الثاني، لكن الورش سوف تكون فقط بناء على الترشيح، والترشيح حتى من وزارات التربية والتعليم على مستوى الوطن العربي. كنا نرغب بالجميع أن يشارك، لكن هي ورش مكثفة، ورش للعمل والإنتاج، فلذا كان العدد فيها مقتصر على المرشحين وأصحاب الخبرة والخبراء اللي تم ترشيحهم من دولهم. ونشكر أيضا مقدما الأخوة والأخوات المحاضرين والخبراء الذين سوف يديرون النقاش غدا بإذن رب العالمين.
نشكركم. ستكون متاحة للجميع أيضا، الورش بعدها ستكون متاحة للجميع.
نعم، الورش سوف تكون متاحة كتسجيل للجميع بإذن الله، وأيضا المخرجات الخاصة بالورش سوف تكون متاحة للجميع على موقع المؤتمر، وسوف تنشر من خلال جميع وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي والإيميل لكل المشاركين الذين حضروا الآن والموجودين في قواعد البيانات الخاصة بالمؤسسات الشريكة في تنفيذ تنفيذ هذا الحوار.
والشهادات سوف ترسل لهم بعد التقييم.
والشهادات سوف ترسل لهم بعد التقييم بإذن رب العالمين. نشكركم جميعا، ونأمل أن نلقاكم في حوارات أخرى تصنع سياسات متميزة ترفع من شأن المعلم في وطننا العربي. شكرا جميعا.
شكرا جزيلا. شكرا أستاذة مهرة، شكرا جزيلا. شكرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.